So that leads us to approval of the minutes for our July 7th and 8th school board retreat and abridged meeting. Are there any modifications? Okay, hearing none, a motion to approve?
So
Mrs.
move.
I'll say Mrs. Anderson and second Mr. Edwards. Okay. Okay, I should mention tonight's that we will be raising, we will use the raise hand, the literal raise hand feature to register our affirmative votes, or will be called upon by the clerk after the voting is closed to indicate a no vote or reason for an abstention. Did I miss something? So with that, could we have a show of hands for those who approve the minutes? Keep it up for the clerk, please.
Madam Chair, we have a unanimous vote to approve the minutes.
Okay, thank you all. And now for tonight's agenda. Any modifications to the agenda? Okay, hearing none, a motion to approve?
So moved.
Mrs. Anderson?
Second.
Mrs. Riggs? Okay, raised hand vote for those who approve the agenda.
Madam Chair, the motion to adopt the agenda for tonight has been approved unanimously, has passed unanimously.
Thank you. So now on to the consent agenda. A, religious exemptions. This was on our SharePoint site for review, so any discussion? Well, first I'll ask for the motion on the second and then ask for discussion. So Mrs. Melnick, a motion to approve, and a second, Mrs. Manning. Any discussion? Okay. Okay, it was on here. Okay. All right, then we'll call for a raised hand vote.
And the vote has passed unanimously.
Thank you all. Action item A, personnel report, administrative appointments. Motion to approve. Mrs. Hughes, thank you. A second, Mrs. Melnick. Discussion? Okay, raised hand vote, please.
Madam Chair, it is approved unanimously.
Thank you. Dr. Spence, do you have any announcements for us?
Yes, ma'am, I do. I've got a number of administrative approvals this evening. As with past meetings, when we've been under these unusual circumstances, they won't be here with us this evening, but I'll go through them. And we will find a time at a later date to bring back these and all of those other folks that we want you to meet and have a chance to introduce to. But first this evening, let me mention Joy Boone. Joy Boone has been serving with distinction as a teacher in Norfolk and here in Virginia Beach at Bayside Middle School, Salem Middle School. She's been a program compliance support teacher, so a background in special education, most recently serving at Salem High School and Salem Middle School. And this evening, I'm pleased that you have approved our recommendation for Joy to serve as the next assistant principal at Strawbridge Elementary School. So congratulations to her. Next is Michaela Cardwell. And Michaela has served with distinction in Virginia Beach as a teacher in CSEP, a teacher at Lincoln Park and White Oak Elementary Schools. Most recently, she's been serving as an instructional specialist in the Office of Programs for Exceptional Children in the Department of Teaching and Learning, and I'm pleased that this evening you've approved our recommendation for Ms. Cardwell to serve as the next assistant principal at North Landing Elementary School. Next is Trinice Durio. Ms. Durio has served with distinction as a teacher at Yorktown Elementary School in the York County School Division. And this evening, I'm pleased that you have approved our selection of recommendation for her to serve as the next assistant principal on the Tri-Campus, working at both Betty F. and Newtown Elementary School. Next is Lisa Suter. Lisa has served as a teacher in the South Bend Community School Corporation and most recently as an elementary principal in the Michigan City area schools in Indiana. And I'm pleased this evening you've accepted our recommendation for her to serve as the next assistant principal at Kempsville Meadows Elementary School. And now moving on to principals, Jennifer Hawes. You all will recognize Ms. Hawes. She has worked at Arrowhead Elementary School as a teacher, John B. Dye, White Oaks, and Creed. She's most recently been serving as an assistant principal first at Tallwood Elementary School and now at Glenwood Elementary School. And we're pleased this evening that you've accepted our recommendation for Mrs. Hawes to serve as the next principal at Corporate Landing Elementary School. And finally, Dexter Warren. Dexter Warren has served as a teacher in Isle of Wight County Schools, as an interim principal and assistant principal in Franklin City Public Schools, and most recently as principal in Franklin City Public Schools. And we're pleased this evening that you've accepted our recommendation for Mr. Warren to serve as the next principal of Indian Lakes Elementary School. So congratulations to all of these candidates.
Thank you. And we do look forward to a face-to-face meeting in the near future. Okay, that brings us to action item 9B, bylaw 136, open meetings and closed meetings. And we have Ms. Linetti at the podium. I'll first take a motion to approve. Mrs. Riggs, and a second.
Second.
Mr. Edwards, discussion or questions for Ms. Linetti or the committee?
Madam Chair, would you like me to explain? This particular bylaw was on for information last month. There were two vendors now on for action. Bylaw 136 has to do with open meetings and closed meetings. There's some significant changes in this particular bylaw. We explained this once before, but after discussing it with the policy review committee, we made some suggestions. In the first section under closed meetings, there's been some issues in prior meetings with us explaining how a school board member challenges going into closed session. Placed into what is now B1, closed session authorities, explains the procedure for school board members required to go into meetings who want to challenge based for that. We simply took the language from the information that's been added to that particular section. In section C, we have. Oh, I'm sorry. That better? Okay. We'll try. Do you need me to repeat that or go back? Good. We're going to go on. All right. Electronic meetings, section C. Electronic meetings happen when more than a quorum of a school board, entire school board or school board committee meets in electronic manner, and that's going to be different in the next section. Just a clarification in this area, because under the governor's order, we had the ability to go into electronic meetings, which you normally cannot do unless you're in an emergency circumstance, but that's now been allowed. So we've added a subsection reference whenever the governor or the General Assembly allows the school board to enter into electronic meetings, you'll be able to do that. A little bit further explanation later on in that subsection. It mentions that subcommittees of the school board, which also constitute school board meetings, can also use the same procedure. A different form of participation electronically is remote location participation. Remote location participation happens when less than a quorum of the members of either the full school board or school board committee have to participate from somewhere else in some form of electronic manner. We have significantly not so much rewritten the section as organized it, and the PRC looked at it differently, discussed how it could be spelled out differently, particularly for the chairs by the school board or the school board committees to understand what the procedures were. What's significant in this section, which is different than when we initially adopted it in 2016, was now we've explained a temporary or permanent disability. It used to be that you could only participate twice in this manner. There was a change in the code section, and it now talks about temporary and permanent disability, which would allow more opportunities. So let's say you were an individual that had a serious operation, could not come in for a number of months, or had a long-term illness, you would now be able to participate in that. There's not a limitation on that particular area. So we've explained that procedure. There's a fairly lengthy section that happens in section 1. Section 2 we've added is personal matter prevents physical attendance. This is when you're making a choice not to come into the meeting. And this one, there is a limitation under the Freedom of Information Act, which allows you twice in a year. We've explained that particular procedure. We've also spelled out you could miss 2 school board meetings and participate for personal reasons. You would be limited on that. But also, if you were assigned to a committee that was a school board meeting, you could also have 2 times in that particular committee meeting. That procedure is laid out here. It also explains out how the chair, how you verify that with the chair and how you explain that to the public. So those are the significant changes you see in here. We think it more explains it in a better manner and lays it a little bit out easier for the school board members, the school board chair to understand. Are there any further questions as to the changes in bylaw 136? That would be all the presentation for the action agenda at this time.
Thank you. So, without further discussion, a raised hand vote?
Madam Chair, it approved unanimously.
Thank you. That brings us to action item C, recovery planning. We have Dr. Bergen back with us, and for the public, the viewing public who just joined us for the formal meeting, we did have a presentation at our workshops. And this is a continuation of that and perhaps an abbreviation of that as well.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So good evening again, board members, and for our viewing public. My name is Mark Bergen, the Chief of Staff for the School Division. Myself, Dr. Robertson, Mr. Freeman, and Dr. Rogers will be repeating some of the information from earlier with the understanding that there could have been members of the public who were not able to participate in the workshop. We want to make sure that they have an understanding of the information about which we're asking you to take action tonight. We have greatly abbreviated our script and we have cut out many of the slides. You do have a new updated handout that was provided for you that has the reduced number of slides. And I would just say to those in the viewing public who did not have a chance to see the workshop, we would certainly be happy to share the PDF of the full presentation that was shared earlier today. Listed on this slide is the same basic outline from the presentation we followed during the workshop. Given their importance, I will be repeating a summary of the results of the parent and staff questionnaires, explaining the health metrics that are included in the reopening plan, and providing a synopsis of the current level of transmission of COVID-19 in Virginia Beach. I'll then be followed again by Dr. Robertson and Mr. Freeman, who are going to briefly review health and mitigation strategies in the plan, and Dr. Rogers will provide an abbreviated version of the planning that has occurred regarding instruction in the plan. So rather than repeat all of the guiding principles listed on the screen, I would just like to emphasize, because of its importance, that our main priority has been and will continue to be the health and safety of our students, staff, and their families, and how our planning has evolved as we have received guidance from health officials at the local, state, and national level. From previous presentations, the community, viewing community here tonight, would be well aware of these 3 scenarios developed by our team. I'd just like to point out that our current plan for this fall does not include scenario number 2 or the hybrid model. As we previously shared in the workshop, the rationale for eliminating the hybrid was that our team has come to believe it just simply wouldn't provide the educational or health benefits for which it had been designed. And also, based on the results of the questionnaires completed by parents, we have reason to believe there will be a sufficient number of parents who elect for full-time virtual instruction, thereby reducing the number of students for whom we need to plan for in-person instruction. So with that brief background, let's just take a look again at the results of the questionnaires completed by our parents and our staff. We are pleased to have had a response rate of approximately 2/3 or 65%. However, we did not hear from 1/3 of our parents, representing 23,000 students, so we are making no definitive conclusions from the results of the questionnaire. But we did learn that somewhere in the vicinity of 60 to 70% of the parents who responded indicated they would favor in-person instruction when it's available, while the remaining 25 to 35% who responded indicated a preference for virtual instruction. And for scenario 3, should the schools remain closed for in-person instruction, 90% of those who responded indicated their child would continue to be enrolled. The responses from teachers about their intentions for returning under all 3 scenarios also were in a high range of 80 to 95%. There were very few teachers who would resign or retire, and approximately 16 to 18% of the teachers indicated they had questions or concerns and would need to speak to their principal before making a decision. Responses from support staff, bus drivers, custodians, food service workers, instructional assistants were also very high at 90%, indicating they would return to employment under any scenario, with just 10% indicating they had questions and would like to speak to their supervisor. From this slide, I just want to draw your attention again to the middle of the timeline in June, when the VDOE released its much anticipated phase guidance for schools, to then only quickly pivot and announce that any decision on how we would reopen schools needed to be a local decision, and that it was important that boards consult with local health experts. The pivot, which happened in mid-June, just happened to coincide or align with a statement from the American Academy of Pediatrics. If you bear with me, I just want to read this statement from the AAP because it's been so highly quoted by members in our community. The AAP says, returning to school is important for the healthy development and well-being of children, but we must pursue reopening in a way that is safe for all students, teachers, and staff. Science should drive decision-making on safely reopening schools. Public health agencies must make recommendations based on evidence, not politics. We should leave it to the health experts to tell us when the time is best to open up school buildings. We need to listen to our educators and our administrators to shape how we do that. So, following that good advice from the AAP and from the VDOE, Dr. Spence asked Mary Shaw, our Coordinator of Health Services, to assist in creating an advisory panel of local physicians. You had the pleasure of hearing from several of those panel members during the workshop. The panel included physicians from a variety of specialties, as they're listed on the screen, as well as the medical director of the Virginia Beach for the Virginia Beach Department of Public Health. We have relied on their expertise in developing a set of health metrics to guide our recommendations on when and how to safely reopen schools for in-person instruction. And speaking of guidance, again, because it's been so widely shared from the community recently, there was new guidance from the CDC released just last Thursday, I believe it was. You've heard a great deal about the one listed on the top, the importance of reopening America's schools for this fall. You haven't heard as much about the companion guidelines preparing a safe return to school in fall 2020, which was published simultaneously by the CDC. Again, because of their importance, I'd like to quote from those guidelines from the CDC, quote, "The health, safety, and well-being of students, teachers, staff, and their families is the most important consideration in determining whether school closure is a necessary step. Administrators should make decisions in collaboration with local health officials based on a number of factors, including the level of community transmission." So as described in our recommended plan, that's exactly what we've done. And so I'd like to just very briefly again review with you the green, yellow, and red metrics that were developed by our advisory panel. You might have memorized it by now. There are 2 health metrics recommended by the panel: test positivity and number of cases, both of which help to determine the measure of community transmission. So regarding test positivity, the column in the middle, any percentage less than 5 is green, a range of 5 to 10 is yellow, and more than 10% would be red. For the second metric, the number of cases per day, calculations are based on the number of cases per day per 100,000 people, with green defined as fewer than 26, yellow in a range of 26 to 264, and red any number of cases greater than 264. I'm going to show again, because of their importance, a couple of screenshots from the Virginia Department of Health. These are as within the last 24 to 48 hours. So this is a screenshot that you can find yourself online at VDH that shows the percent positivity for our region since mid-March. The goldenrod line shows how the 7-day rolling average for percent positivity coincides with important decisions by the governor, including his declaration of a state of emergency on March 12, when the percent of positivity first spiked, followed by a stay-at-home order on March 30 as it continued to climb. If you look for May 15 in the timeline, you'll see that's when he announced phase 1 of Forward Virginia, when the percent positivity dipped below 10%. And he announced phase 2 on June 5 after the percent positivity fell below 5%. However, it's to the far right of the graph that I'd like to draw your eye. It clearly shows, with the continued easing of restrictions, the percent positivity has climbed again throughout July in our region to its current level of 11.4%. This graphically shows the number of cases. Again, it's from the VDH website from 2 days ago. And it is the 7-day rolling average of new cases. You'll see that the goldenrod line remained relatively flat for nearly 3 months until it has climbed at an alarming rate throughout July, so that we're now recording more than 400 new cases in our area every single day. This screenshot was shared with you earlier in the workshop as well, and it indicates that there are 3,548 known cases in Virginia Beach, and that we are leading the 7 cities in our region with a grand total of 12,632 in Hampton Roads. Of those 3,548, I think it's important to note that on the far left-hand side, you can see that leading, not in the best of ways, are young adults, 331 young adults, 947 young adults, with an additional 331 children known to have contracted COVID-19 in Virginia Beach alone. And lastly, just one screenshot instead of all that I shared in the workshop. This is one screenshot from new metrics that we didn't learn about until this morning on a call with Dr. Lane, that the VDH is working on creating what they're calling a pandemic metrics dashboard to report community transmission of COVID-19 using a 4-color scheme: green, no transmission; yellow, low; orange, moderate; and burgundy, substantial. And as you can see on this map of the Commonwealth, our region is experiencing substantial spread, whereas the level to our immediate west is moderate and Northern Virginia is low. And also, our region now accounts for nearly 60% of all new cases across the state. So, given the current and concerning health indicators within the city and region, Dr. Spence has recommended that we begin school for all students virtually this September, and that we continue to monitor for community transmission and transition students back to in-person learning only when it is safe to do so and upon the recommendations of medical experts. Using the graphic on this slide for your reference, to the far left, when both of the health metrics described earlier are green, students whose parents select option 1 would attend school in person, whereas if both of the metrics are red, students whose parents have selected option 1 would remain home and receive all of their instruction remotely. And when we're between those two extremes, with some combination of yellow-green or yellow-yellow, we would begin to transition students back for in-person instruction, beginning first with all of our elementary age students, as well as all of our students in grades 6 and 9, which are pivotal transitional years, as well as special education and English language learners across all grade levels. That would leave grades 7, 8, 10, 11, and 12, whose parents have selected option 1, to continue with virtual instruction, but we do intend to phase them back to face-to-face instruction as health conditions improve. And then for option 2, parents who would prefer virtual instruction over in-person instruction will select option 2, or they can certainly make a different selection for each of their children. Instruction for option 2 would come from teachers who would be assigned to the Virginia Beach Virtual Learning Center, or what we're calling the VLC. And although the students would be enrolled there, they would also be concurrently enrolled in their home school. I'd now like to turn the presentation over to Dr. Robertson, who's going to briefly review some of the health and safety mitigations that will be in place for students and staff when we transition to in-person instruction.
Thank you, Dr. Bergen.
Thank you, Dr. Bergen. So as we all yearn to get kids back in school as soon as we can, I talked about some of the health mitigation strategies we're planning for. Some of them are mentioned on the slide. I am just going to mention one on this particular slide, and that's the use of face coverings. We are going to require all staff and students to wear face coverings while they're in school every day and when they cannot maintain 6 feet of social distancing. Next slide. In the next slide, we also recognize that we're going to have to adjust some of our daily procedures to ensure we're mitigating close proximity of students and using social distancing. So we're going to be using the strategies that are noted on this particular slide to ensure we're creating an environment that, again, adheres to social distancing. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Freeman, Chief Operations Officer.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Robertson. I'll just touch on a couple of items from these slides here. So for transportation, we talked about how critical it is for our capacity on buses. So we're requiring that parents sign up for transportation. Food services will use a flexible distribution model. Next slide. We'll have enhanced cleaning protocols in place. And there will be signage posted, not only informational that can be used to encourage hand washing and wearing a mask, but also signage to promote distancing. And we will ensure that our emergency drills have been trained properly so that we can conduct them in a safe COVID mitigation environment. With that, I will turn it over to Dr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. So good evening again, Chairwoman Rye, Vice Chairwoman Melnick, school board members, and Dr. Spence. This evening, I'll briefly summarize what was shared earlier in your work session. So the slide that you have in front of you just outlines the timeline for where we've been with our instructional plans. Of course, in March, we started with our continuity of learning. We transitioned to our emergency learning plan. We shifted to our summer learning recovery plan, and now we're in the midst of planning for, finalizing our plans for the fall. The teaching and learning plan for the 2020-21 school year utilized data that were collected from the continuity of learning plan, emergency learning plan, and summer learning opportunities in order to provide the best possible teaching and learning opportunities for students and staff as we return in the fall. And as a result, the plans do address curriculum, instruction, and assessment, and it will look significantly different from the emergency learning plans that were provided in the spring. Students have experienced a significant level of trauma, and adults have as well, during the extended closure. And as such, social and emotional learning will be a key aspect of our instructional aspects. Curriculum and daily instruction will be more robust, involving more rigor, differentiation, and the focus will be both on recovery as well as deeper learning. Staff have identified all standards that may have been impacted from the extended school closure, and they have revised sequence documents to ensure that teachers are able to teach what they need to teach next school year. Ongoing formative assessments will be a regular part of the learning. Attendance is absolutely required, and meaningful interactions will be closely monitored. Assignments for any virtual learning will be graded with feedback provided. Our students will have more synchronous live learning opportunities to engage with their teachers, and extensive professional learning for our teachers and staff will be ongoing to make sure that they are able to enhance the instructional experiences for our students. And I want to share a little more detail about options 1 and 2 briefly. As part of the fall registration verification process, families will be asked to confirm their final choices for options 1, face-to-face learning, or option 2, virtual learning. And our families who have selected option 1 are allowing their students to go to school as part of the face-to-face model when available using health parameters as outlined in the presentation previously. For option 2, the VLC or Virtual Learning Center is a fully online pre-K through 12 school option. Our students enrolled in the VLC will be assigned to a VBCPS teacher and receive instruction through a variety of online platforms, and primarily we will use Schoology. As a reminder, option 1, face-to-face learning, I want to point out some of the aspects that are similar for both options. For both options, our elementary students and teachers will experience a schedule that mirrors what a schedule would look like during the normal school year. And students in our middle and high school schedules for both options will reflect a 4x4 block schedule that reduces the number of courses that students have to take and reduces the number of courses that teachers will have to teach. And I'll share more about that momentarily, remind you. And also, I want to point out that reading is a concern of ours, and we've outlined an extensive plan to ensure that our staff are trained on the science of reading to better able enhance reading instruction and close achievement gaps at the elementary level. Regarding option 2, again, our students attend the VLC for at least one semester, and they will be taught by VB teachers. Schoology will be the primary learning management platform for this modality, and it is important to reiterate that the structure and expectations for students and teachers will be different from the emergency learning plan. And I also want to point out that some of the courses may not be offered if not enough students register for those courses, and that typically happens during the normal school year, or if that course cannot be taught effectively in the virtual environment. Some additional commonality between both options are ensuring that a schedule for instruction takes place 5 days a week, so every day students will have instruction, whether it be synchronous or asynchronous or face-to-face. Guidelines for teachers, students, and administrators are being finalized and will be included in our 2020-21 instructional plan. And the first couple of weeks of school will be spent on building relationships and establishing a sense of community with our students and families because of the closure. And now I'd like to remind the board on the schedules that we're proposing. The sample schedule that you see for the elementary school level, is in front of you, and it requires core instructional minutes to be accounted for to ensure that our students reach proficiency, grade level standards, and that any learning gaps are closed. Data-driven small group lessons will be provided synchronously or live for math, reading, and core content subjects. And the required instructional minutes will be met using a balance of digital and non-digital and hands-on learning experiences. Students will not be on their devices during the entire language arts or math blocks. Our professional learning is designed for teachers to be able to identify and implement appropriate and aligned experiences to ensure that students have the opportunity to engage in digital and non-digital learning. And you'll notice that an effort was made to have intentional blocks of time for students to put their screens down and have a solid break for lunch, planning, and movement. The schedule that you see before you is for middle school. The middle school and the high school schedules were developed to be used in both options and maximize all health and safety protocols, minimizing the academic course load, classroom transitions, and the teacher-to-student ratio. And the most effective means for achieving this goal at the secondary level was to move to the 4x4 schedule. And for students, this approach also offers a simpler, more practical schedule that they can manage. And this slide shows the sample for the virtual 4x4 high school schedule. Students will be able to take up to 4 courses at one time. We talked about additional support that we would provide for our students with disabilities, our English learners, our gifted learners, academies programs, and the Advanced Technical Center. And lastly, we talked about some of the resources that we're making available to support our students and our families digitally in response to some of the response that we got from the Continuity Learning Plan and the Emergency Learning Plan. And then lastly, we are continuing to work with staff and families to ensure that all of our students have access to technology and the internet. And with that, I will transition back over to Dr. Bergen for next steps.
Thank you, Dr. Rogers, and board members. They haven't changed since the workshop. So our next steps, first and most importantly, is we're looking forward to you taking some action on our recommendations. Once you do so, and we know that you have affirmed the superintendent's plan or given different direction, we're then going to go from planning to doing. We know that parents and staff are going to have questions. This is a complex plan. We're answering as many of those questions as we can through an FAQ, which is online. We have an FAQ for staff and a different FAQ for parents. We are going to be activating a call center so people can call and talk to a person about their specific questions. We're going to continue to do community information sessions. We're not going to ask anyone to make a decision until they firmly understand what it is they're being asked to decide upon. So there'll be two options per our recommendations, option 1 or 2. Those options will be verified through what we're calling a registration verification process. It'll happen electronically, and then we will start calling when we don't hear from parents electronically. Once we know the volume for option 1 and option 2, that'll give us a sense of how many teachers we'll need for the VLC. So we will ask all of our teachers for their preference for a virtual instructional position or an in-person one. The number of positions for virtual will certainly be dependent on the demand from the families who are seeking option 2. So we'll meet as many preferences as we possibly can. So once we know where the students are being registered into, once we know where the staff are being assigned to, we will then create the schedules and we will communicate with families so they will have a sense of what's going to happen in terms of instruction for this coming school year. That is a lot of work to do in a very, very compacted period of time that we normally have the luxury of an entire summer to do. I mean, normally scheduling is done for 1 year when the preceding year has ended. So with that, we're going to go ahead and we'll be back to you in August 11 to update you about that entire process. And we will submit our instructional plan and our health plan to the VDOE as required. So we'd like to get back to your questions at this time. We were somewhere in the midst of them during the workshop.
Right, thank you. And before we reopen for discussion, a procedural question for Madam Clerk or Madam Attorney that I believe because it's an action item that we're supposed to take a motion to approve in a second and then reopen for discussion? Okay, so do we have a motion to approve what's the official word, the fall 2020 plan? And again, this is to reopen for discussion. Motion to approve. Okay, Mrs. Melnick, a second.
I'll second.
Mr. Edwards. Okay, and what I'd like to propose is that we start with those who did not get a chance on the first round and maybe ask 2 questions apiece, and then we can start over again. I want everybody to feel we'll be here as long as we need to get through all the
I
questions.
just have one quick question before.
Yes, Mrs. Melnick.
Could I just-
Dr. Bergen, can somebody please just take a moment to explain the survey, which was brought up a lot during the
Park, I can tackle that. Also, let me just mention, so you know from a question perspective, that we do still have 2 of the physicians who were serving on that work group with us on Zoom, and they are able and willing to answer any questions that you might have about their work and the metrics, because I know
That's
that came
good.
up over and over again tonight.
Thank you, Terry.
So, just quickly about the survey, what I want to say about the survey is it wasn't a survey, it was a questionnaire. It was a specific questionnaire to our parents and to our families about a specific set of topics. And so specifically, we asked our parents if we had to go to school in this scenario 1 in that case was face-to-face instruction, would you be willing to send your children to school? And you saw the results of that, 60% of them said yes. We weren't asking folks to rank. We then said in scenario 2, if you had to go with a hybrid model, fewer students and a mitigated model where your children perhaps wouldn't be there all day, how many of you would want to have your kids go in that model? And that was a higher percentage of students. And then the highest percentage of folks were the folks, if you want to be technical about it, who said if we were virtual, I'd still have my kids in school here. And so I just want to be clear, this isn't ranking. It shouldn't be talked about as ranking. It shouldn't be talked about as, because of this, then we should do this. If we were arguing for that, we probably would argue for the fully virtual model, because that's where the largest percentage of parents said they would have their children participate in a technical sense. But again, that's not the purpose. Same for our teachers. And I'll just say for our teachers, and I'm saying this for them publicly, that the idea of retribution for putting that, we had 1,500 teachers who responded and said, I want to work, or over 1,000, I suppose, teachers who responded and said, I'd like to work virtually. And I would argue there isn't one of them that's seen any sort of retribution. We said to our teachers, this is for planning purposes. We said to our teachers that we need to know this so that we can begin to understand, like, will this work? And to our parents and to our teachers, we also said a number of times, you'll have a chance once the plan is, finalized to tell us again. So this is just for us to get a sense of the numbers, and you'll have a chance to tell us again. So I wouldn't take any of it at face value. It was specifically for the purposes of planning for my team, and really wasn't intended to be used in any other way. And so I would sort of ask that as we think about the comments about the surveys tonight, that we remember it wasn't intended to be used in any other way than planning for our team, and that we told people you'll have another crack at this later when we have our plans, that we're just trying to get a picture of what we're facing here. So I just thank you for the opportunity to mention that, and thank you for the question.
I just have one more question about that.
Yes, ma'am.
So, can you tell me the percent again of how many teachers said they would be willing to come back and teach in person? Somehow I missed that. Or was
So
that
it was
not part
roughly,
of
it was roughly, and we can pull the numbers back, but it was roughly 25% of our teachers who said they would prefer to teach virtually in the case that that we were doing a face-to-face teaching.
That was virtually. So then
So
how,
75%-ish. It was a very small percentage that said they wouldn't come back at all, and then and there was probably 60% because there was about 10% there who said I'm not sure.
so approximately 75% of the teachers that answered this survey or this questionnaire said they would be willing to come back into the classroom and teach
If we opened up
face-to-face.
face-to-face for students, and if we opened up with all the mitigations in place, correct.
Okay. That's what I wasn't clear about.
All right, colleagues, let Mrs. Melnick know if you're interested and if you have questions that didn't get a chance on the first round. Mrs. Felton.
Thank you. And this is the first of many questions that I have, and I'll try to be considerate of my other colleagues. But Dr. Bergen, you spoke on the call center that you would be having for the parents. What type of hours would that be? Because our parents have different hours when they work and when they are available. So, how long would this be open to our parents at the call center?
So, good evening, Ms. Felton. We were planning for the call center, anticipating that people would have some questions. We have set the call center up pending a decision of the board to begin on tomorrow, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., Thursday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., as a first step to field calls and answer questions. We'll also continue to update our FAQs related to the questions that come in for anyone who cannot call. Next week, when we start reaching out to those families who have not had the opportunity to answer online, and when we reach out to our teachers to, again, touch base with every one of our teachers to determine whether they prefer option one or prefer option two, our administrators will be equipped to answer questions at that particular moment.
Okay, thank you. I'll be back later.
Do you have a second? Two questions at a time.
Great. Then, as we were speaking, I was connected. Had a chance to be on the Parent Connection yesterday evening, and we talked about caseworkers or supporters. So, how much of that will transcend over to the parents as well? How much support will they get in this new transition, and how diligent will we be in staying connected with them and making sure that they have it? That's just one of my things I'm worried about now.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, Mrs. Felton. Our school counselors and school staff have not stopped working with students since March 13th, and they stand ready to support any parent who contacts them. So I do want to make that very clear. Our staff are still working. As a matter of fact, we are planning to bring our school counselors back early to make sure that we make contact with staff and students as needed.
Well, we'll go with who's here, Miss Owens.
Thank you. Um, I guess I'll start off with, I have a question about the percentages, and I know that it's a questionnaire and we can only take a very broad starter understanding from the questionnaire. But what factors are we looking at or putting in place when we have schools that, you know, the broad numbers said 75% or more teachers are willing to come back if we do face-to-face, and we'll look at what the numbers are.
I just don't want, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay, I
I
won't
don't want
throw
us
that
to
number.
characterize willing to come back, because
Okay,
that's not
thank
what
you.
we asked them. We asked them specifically, if we are back in school and it's safe to be back in school and we're face to face, what would be your preference? Would it be for
Preference,
virtual
okay.
or face to face instruction? So not, I don't want to characterize it as willing, because they didn't have the parameters of what that would look like, and we didn't design this questionnaire to get at their willingness
Gotcha.
today. It was designed to get at a planning for our purposes, to get this picture that we learned, that we think there'll be enough teachers who would want to teach remotely that we can offer a virtual learning center. That was really the big question that we had. And I just want to be careful with the whole board, not to characterize it as they're all willing to come back tomorrow, because they didn't have the full details of our plan when we put that questionnaire out. And we were very clear about that when we put it out, that we know we don't have that. Once we have it, we'll come back to you.
Gotcha. Okay, well, the question, regardless of the number, I'm wondering what mitigation or what we're going to be looking at if we have schools where 60% of the children in school A are willing to be on option, go back to school when it's face-to-face, versus another school who, for whatever variety of reasons, has a 95% student return rate. What does that look like as far as the teachers being able to have the preference if the majority of kids in their school are coming back? And what does that look like in terms of safety for students and teachers in schools that we know are going to have, I don't know, 20 kids per classroom versus other places in the city where we have 10 children per classroom? And how do we kind of balance the safety, equity, and overall situation when we have those situations? I expect that we have certain schools that we know are going to have more students coming back face-to-face for a variety of reasons.
So we're going to establish protocols for how the VLC will operate. The teachers will apply to the VLC Academy at the division level. We'll look at the course enrollments like we would in any normal year, and then make those matches. We can anticipate we're probably going to have some situations where a particular school has a mismatch. As always in the division, a teacher is assigned to a school based upon enrollment in particular courses. It is not unusual to move teachers around. It happens routinely at the elementary school level as enrollment particularly fluctuates at the elementary school level. So I do imagine, Ms. Owens, that Mr. Robertson thought he was going to be teaching at Strawbridge Elementary this year, but based upon his preference and the needs of the division, he's not going to be teaching at Strawbridge Elementary this year. He's going to be over at Cook Elementary School this year. I imagine that will happen, but because we'll have the protocols established, it won't be a surprise to anyone when they get that call.
Are we looking at any max level of students per classroom? Like, I'm hearing restaurants going back down to 50% capacity. Are we looking at doing 50% capacity in classrooms, or are we comfortable with doing higher percents in classrooms and restaurants, et cetera?
No, we are going to be placing desks in our classroom where they are at least 3 feet apart. So Mr. Freeman's office has already gone through the classrooms. All of our principals will be going through their classrooms next week to look at furniture and to ensure that we have furniture spread out, desks, et cetera, at least 3 feet apart. We think the number is going to give us, in a face-to-face setting, right around 20 students per class, which will then dictate spaces. If we have situations, which we might, where we have more than 20 students in a particular class, we'll look at utilizing some larger spaces. Like I mentioned earlier, We might be able to use the cafeteria for a class and spread those students out in the cafeteria and put in a mobile whiteboard where they can use that in the classroom. We might use the cafetorium or auditorium or Scola or commons area or gym if we get into those situations. But we feel like for the vast majority of classes, we'll be able to put those classes with the number of students selecting face-to-face within that one setting.
Okay. So any further thoughts? We'll get you next round. Okay, Ms. Owens? Okay, Mr. Edwards?
Yeah, I don't want to, this is not my bundle of two, but I think it's an important follow-up on the questionnaire and the timeline. I think it's so important for us to remember that questionnaire, the staff was responding to that, and the parents were responding to that primarily the first 2 weeks of July. And that's right after we had gone to phase 2 and everybody was excited about, man, maybe we'll be at phase 1 or whatever that is in August. And look where we are now. So that data is, and Dr. Spence, I'm only bringing it up because so doggone much has been made of it that it's been misused and it was skewed by the timeline factor and a whole bunch of other things. So that's got to be on record.
Mrs. Weems?
I disagree that it was misused. I think that it was used for guidance, and I think it gave us guidance that we know that teachers are willing to come back in the building, whether it's a questionnaire or whatever. So I don't agree that that questionnaire has been falsified or misused or is not valid. But anyway, my questions now are just for virtual teaching. Whatever scenario we choose for the teacher that is teaching virtually, whether it's everybody at first, 25% at first, everybody for 6 weeks, everybody for the whole year. So the virtual teacher, will the teacher be in his or her classroom teaching virtually, or will they be virtually teaching from their home or wherever they want to be? What will the time of day for the virtual teaching be? Will it mirror the elementary time and the middle school time and the high school time of students? And then you said that virtual teachers might have bigger classrooms. What do you say? What do you mean by bigger classrooms? Just ballpark figure, if you can. And how are these virtual teachers going to make sure we reduce screen time and do manipulatives, especially for our students with IEPs, hands-on, and all that kind of good stuff?
I feel like that's an interview question. You know, to trip the person up, you got to remember all four.
Okay, I got them right here.
So-
Will they be teaching from
So
the classroom?
the first one, so let's talk about both scenarios. In option one, then you're starting the year virtually.
Mm-hmm.
When health metrics get us in the right spot, that teacher will be transitioning into face-to-face.
No, I'm talking about, after everything's said and done, I'm a virtual teacher, I'm teaching virtual students. Am I going to Hermitage Elementary, going to my classroom and teaching them virtually because all my resources are there and all that stuff?
So, at this point, as long as the governor has not closed schools, we are going to provide teachers the option to work in the classroom to deliver the virtual lesson or to work from home.
Okay, we're gonna provide them the option.
Yes.
Okay,
As long as the governor has not closed schools.
okay, and how about the time frame of that day?
Yep, so
Is that
we
gonna
are,
be
we are,
optional?
yes, and so we are working on the times, the exact times for the virtual day. Some of the considerations we're having to factor in right now is, as we look at transportation schedule, should we return and under option one, in that first phase part with pre-K through grade 5, then grade 6 and grade 9. Transportation's working out the parameters for a reduced number of students on the bus, what the schedules would look like. Because what we want to do is mirror the virtual learning day similar to the face-to-face day, so that kids can be in the habit, teachers can be in the habit of working within the same day. What will not happen is students will not be sitting in front of a computer screen for the 6.5 hour days they might be in an elementary school. Those times are restricted at the elementary school. Dr. Rogers' team has created time frames of 20 to 30 minutes of synchronous learning at a time, spread out throughout the day. Synchronous and asynchronous. We recognize that some students may have challenges with childcare, that they can't, if they're in a childcare center and they can't log in at the right time when the teacher's doing synchronous, we're going to be working through solutions to work with those particular kids and what that might look like. At the secondary level, the classes are being recommended right now 45 minutes of synchronous learning where you're face-to-face. The teachers will have a schedule just like they would face-to-face. So let's say I teach second block. Second block is 9 to 10:45. I am expected as the teacher to be available from 9 to 10:45 for that particular class who would meet at 9 o'clock. I am expected to provide a 45-minute synchronous lesson, and I'm expected to be available for the next 45 minutes if any of those students, as they work on those assignments, have any questions. In the Virtual Learning Center, the VLC, we're trying to create a similar, comparable, consistent model in the Virtual Learning Center, which is going to be for the entire first semester, so that teachers in option 2 and teachers in option 1 have very similar expectations. The reason we expect more students in classes in option 2 is because if I'm a principal of a high school, I'm staffed at 21.25 to 1. So let's do easy numbers. I have my high school principal, I have 2,125 kids. I get 100 teachers. If I can only put 20 kids in classes at the high school, then that means I certainly got to put more in a class in the Virtual Learning Center options. So we expect in option 1 the class sizes to be about 20 because we have to be able to prepare for those students to then transition into face-to-face, which means we expect in the Virtual Learning Center those classes to be 30 or above.
Okay, thank you.
Where is the virtual learning? Is it a place?
It is not a place.
Okay, so
Yes.
teachers that are, I'm sorry, I needed to follow up on that.
Well,
Didn't you
just-
ask where they're going to be?
Please work through us here in the middle.
Sorry.
Thank you.
She did ask where, so the Virtual Learning
Where the
Center
teacher was gonna be.
is not in a brick and mortar building. The Virtual Learning Center would be a mythical, no. It would be in the cloud. The Virtual Learning Center would be in the cloud. And the students would access their curriculum through the Virtual Learning Center online completely. The teachers in the Virtual Learning Center would have access to a brick and mortar building should they need to get into a brick and mortar building to be able to deliver lessons. So we're going to, for example, let's say Don is the Virtual Learning Center teacher at Cox High School. And normally I'm the Cox High School wrestling coach, but not this year. This year, since there's no wrestling, I'm the Cox High School Virtual Learning Center teacher. But I still need to be able to get to Cox High School to be able to stay connected to my school and have access to resources. I'm going to be able to call Dr. Kelly and go, hey, I need to get into school and do some of these things so that I can provide the best learning experiences for my kids, and we're going to make that happen.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I was dying to find that out when you asked it.
Mrs. Manning.
Thank you. I have two questions, and then you can put me back in the queue. My first one is an HR-related question that one of the speakers said. So she said that if someone gets COVID, they would only get 2 weeks of paid leave. But I think I remember reading in a document that was sent to us a couple months ago that there's perhaps 12 weeks of paid leave. Can someone...
The 2 weeks of leave that they're talking about is what's covered under the federal COVID relief leave that's available to our staff. What I would do is I would point employees to the intranet page. We have an employee resource for COVID-19. There is an entire description in there about leave. If they're talking about leave beyond those that are provided under the federal relief, there is also additional leave that's available to them, but it would come under family and medical leave, and they would be using their leave for that purpose, right? So it's available, but it's under family and medical leave. And of course, if they're part of a sick leave bank, they can tap into those things. And so there's a lot of other options for leave. And what we are telling our employees and telling our supervisors is, if you're an employee and you've got questions about leave, first go to the COVID-19 resource site on the intranet page. There's an entire set of information about leave and what's available. And second, contact your supervisor or contact employee relations. They will walk you through what would be available should something happen.
Okay, thank you. And then my next question is, I understand the idea behind the 4x4 program. I get that for scheduling purposes with the virtual and the one semester. I get all that. I still have great concerns about AP classes being 4x4. Have you done any comparisons with districts that have used the 4x4 for AP classes and their testing scores? Have you done any comparisons to those districts compared to ours?
So the 4x4 with AP courses is not uncommon. Lots of school divisions do them. As we work out the schedule, there may be some situations where we run AP courses daily through a virtual means, and we're still having those discussions. But it happens all the time. Now, what happens is if students take the AP course during the first semester, then there are mechanisms in place to support students during the second semester so that they're prepared for the AP exams in the spring. And conversely, you could argue that if students take the an AP course in the spring, sometimes that's a shorter period of time prior to them taking the AP exams, and they have special mechanism in place to support students so that they're successful. So I'm very familiar with it in my previous school division where we did a hybrid 4x4 where we had hybridized classes at an AP level at the first semester and the second semester, and then we ran some and we called it a skinny block. So we'll take a look at that very closely based on the decision that we have this evening to see what options that we have, but we absolutely will support those students if they have to take the AP courses during the first semester, making sure that they have support the second semester.
Do you have any
I
data?
can tell you, yes.
Okay.
We can get you specific data from the College Board, but I can tell you that when I was in Houston, so it's been a little bit of time, so the data may have changed, but at least when I was in Houston and we were looking at this, there was zero discernible difference nationally amongst districts who are on 4x4 and districts who were not.
Okay, thank you.
Not Chesapeake kids.
Thank you. We're up to Mrs. Riggs.
Did you skip me?
I did. She hasn't had it
Go ahead.
It's just two short questions, and I'll want to get back. Just two short questions, but I'll want to get back in the kitty too. Question, I know that you were talking about Mr. Freeman and his crew had already gone to the classrooms and decided how many kids and all of, the spaces. But I know that the elementary kids, many of them are at tables. They don't have desks. So have you guys accounted for that? Do you have enough desk in your supply down at the plant to be able to provide for all of those classrooms?
So we don't, it's funny, we have no desks in the supply, but we do have desks. Yes, we had a conversation, a meeting about 2 weeks ago about furniture, making sure, because we do know that the elementary level, in particular with flexible seating, we have eliminated a lot of desks, but we have enough desks in Virginia Beach to equip every classroom with the desks they need. Now, one thing might be a little painful for some teachers. We might ask them to take some of their furniture home, which could probably happen. Principals will be going through their school classrooms in the next couple of weeks, putting tags on furniture, and it doesn't mean that's where you sit. It means that what needs to go.
Yeah, because there's a lot, not only are they at tables, they're all over the floor. I mean, they're as we know, if you've been in the elementary and visited, They're
And-
everywhere.
And some of that will be okay if they can maintain appropriate distancing,
Yes.
but for example, couches won't be okay,
Right.
right? So, I mean, there's
Where
things like
there's
that that we'll have to
More
look
kids
at.
together, okay.
Right.
All right, so that's just the one question, okay, just checking on that. And the other one is I have to respond also to what you were saying about the questionnaire and what Dan said. And just an example of people having their minds changed since since they did that. Back when they were answering that questionnaire, I had even called Dr. Spence. I know Bev and I both talked to him and said, look, you had, announced, you talked about the middle, the virtual one, the half and half, the hybrid. And then they came out, the DOE came out with, oh, you can get a variance if you ask for the 5-day variance. And I'm like, gosh, things are going so good. I even asked you, I was like, we just talked about that today, you and your staff. We were talking about that today. We were discussing it. What should we do? And I'm like, oh, I'm glad you did, because it's looking good. I am at 180 degrees now. I have no problem telling you that from what I was then. I was looking at, yeah, maybe we should start back. Let's all go, but not now. Things have changed so much that I am concerned for the safety of our students and our staff. So right there, just this little bit of time, the way it's changed, that's how I feel.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. First one, I think I know the answer to, but I'm just going to ask it. Is there a cutoff for how many students who, like, for example, is there any cutoff for how many students would say they'd go face to face?
No.
No,
We're going to
obviously not.
provide
Okay.
services for students who
Okay,
choose.
so if you end up with a lot more face to face, especially along, like in the secondary level where you have like 30 students in a class or something, I worry about the distance and how you're going to do social distancing whatsoever, in that,
Well,
in that scenario.
let me speak to that if I could.
Okay.
So one of the reasons that we suggested a step in with our plan was that as we talked to our health panel, and they said, look, we genuinely think it's safe for students and teachers to return to school when it's yellow and trending downward. You recall we put a little thing in the document there, and it says it's locally a VBCPS decision, and there is some variance. Well, one of the areas of variance was that because really their recommendation, and you have the report in your file in your folder, was if it's yellow, open for students. And we said, great, but we want to step into that. And one of the reasons we want to step into that is we believe cohorting is incredibly important. And we feel we can cohort at the elementary level. So you can put students in a classroom, whether that's 20 or 30, but it wouldn't be 30, but leave them there in that classroom and have them not interact significantly with other students during the school day and with other staff. More difficult to do in a high school setting. More difficult to do in a middle school setting because kids change classes multiple times, which is the major reason for the shortened number of classes that we want students to take. But also because we want them to be able to stay in that classroom. So even if it is more of them, stay in that classroom. But if we only bring back ninth grade, for example, then we can spread those students out more and have better distancing. And until we know that it's safe to go beyond that and begin transitioning as the yellow data continues to decline, as we feel like it's stabilized, it's not spiking in the wrong direction, and our mitigations appear to be working and people are feeling comfortable, we can then begin to bring in other grade levels.
Okay. I'm thrilled that we're looking at 4x4 because I've been pushing for that for a while, as you know. Will new students who move into Virginia Beach have a chance to choose?
Yes.
Okay. And I just have one more question. It has to do with training. Okay, fine. 2 questions and then we'll come back. So put me on the list for the next round.
So, one of the things that was brought up a lot was this worrying so much about red, green, and yellow, and Are those numbers that will be reported daily? I mean, are people going to be more concerned and worried about, oh my gosh, it's day 12 in yellow, and then, so I'm just, that piece first.
Okay, so it's important to know that we're talking about a 7-day rolling average,
Okay,
and that there would then be a wait period after that initial data point comes in on 7-day rolling average that we said in the document, that there would be then a wait period
right,
to confirm that that data is still trending in that same direction and not reversing course, that it's not an anomaly, but that it's actually a trend of data in the region. And so, so I don't know if that answers that question, but relative to people being worried about looking at it on a day-to-day basis, we're not, although you can see the data on the VDH website on a day-to-day basis, and ultimately we can give you a number that says, if you're monitoring the data, there's a kind of a case per day threshold that you could look at. It's just a mathematical calculation of really what we would consider to be the number of cases per 100,000 people in the population over a 7-day rolling average.
okay. All right, and my other is, can we just one more time discuss, maybe it's you or one of the doctors online, why we are part of a district, part of a region, and why if Virginia Beach's numbers are so high, are we lumped in with somebody else, and are we skewing
So-
it for somebody else?
Sure. So I'll speak
And
to it
vice
first,
versa.
and then I know Dr. Rowland and Dr. Best, who you've not yet met, are also on the call. So when I'm done, if they want to weigh in on that or the other question, the Eastern region is not quite as big as a couple of folks said it was. There's a circle around a picture of it, but it's not quite as big as a few folks said it was. Dr. Bergen outlined who's in the Eastern region. 80% of the cases are in the 7 cities that really comprise our neighbors here in Hampton Roads, And it is absolutely fair to say that our parents work and commute in those 7 cities, and that our staff comes in from those 7 cities.
Okay.
And we do have staff that comes in from North Carolina. We have staff that comes in from Accomack County, from the Eastern Shore. We have staff that comes in from Suffolk and Isle of Wight. We have Dr. Bergen commutes from Suffolk every day. So we do have staff that comes in from across the region. And so I'll let our doctors speak to it, but my understanding is in their conversation, as you heard Dr. Mitchell say earlier, they determined that it was the most honest measure of impact on Virginia Beach, was to look at the Eastern region. Yeah, sounds like they might want to weigh in. Dr. Allen?
Welcome, doctor.
This is Dr. Rowland. Can you hear me?
Yes, please proceed.
Yeah, I agree with everything Dr. Spence said, and it was particularly the advice of the health department that they said we really must consider the Eastern region. And also speaking to the fact that, using the Eastern Shore, there's such a small population in comparison that it really shouldn't skew our data. So that argument kind of falls apart because we don't, there's not as much population, so that works. But it was largely at the recommendation of the health department, and then considering where our staff is coming from, it gives us the best view.
Thank you.
Mrs. Hughes?
Okay. Well, I don't know if this is one or two. So it was mentioned that during virtual learning, the whole time would not be on the computer. There would be manipulatives and that sort of thing. Is that something that'll be provided? I don't see how that would always work, because there may be people who do not have the necessary tools. And the other part of that is, how are we going to be providing accommodations for students with special needs at home with virtual learning?
Yes, thank you for asking that question. We are looking at providing some materials for our students. As a matter of fact, we applied for some funds to use with the CARES Act funding to provide some take-home packets. I know with the ATC program, we're looking at providing kits to accompany students' programs there. So we are looking at some options and opportunities to be able to provide that for students. We put in for kits for art materials to take home. We would arrange for them to be picked up very much like what we did with the emergency learning plan. We made arrangements for families to come and pick up books to take home, and we'll do likewise in this instance. And the next part of your question was with IEPs. So our staff have worked very closely with our students with disabilities, parents, to make sure that we have IEPs in place to make those accommodations that will be done at home. We will certainly utilize synchronous learning opportunities with our learning management system to be able to provide accommodations. Now, there will be some differences, so it's not like you can do exactly what you can do in a face-to-face opportunity, but I tell you, the team has done a phenomenal job in trying to do so. And of course, depending on how we decide to go back, we are planning for the possibility of being able to bring certain student populations with disabilities back into the face-to-face setting, very much like what we did with the the extended school year program this summer.
Well, I mean, can you give some examples of how we would provide these services at home? I mean, obviously, some
Sure.
things like extended time, things like that, small group are built into being at
Sure.
home.
Is Dr. Myers-Dobb on, because she can give some specific examples, and she very well may be still on.
She can unmute herself if she.
Dr. Myers-Dobb, Mrs. Hughes has asked to provide a specific example with which we can provide some.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Dr. Myers-Dobb, did you hear the question?
Okay, there's a little bit of a delay, so I just wanted to make sure you could hear me. Yes, so some of the accommodations, and I don't know if you're necessarily asking about accommodations. Are you specifically asking about how we're going to provide that specially designed instruction, or are you asking about both?
Ronnie, both.
I'm having difficulties hearing. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so some of the I didn't hear a response. So some of the accommodations that our students have, for example, are visual. So we can build into that virtual environment some of those visuals. We can give parents those visuals at home if they want to do them on the home side, or we can actually build them and the teachers can show them when they're actually teaching. And I think the biggest difference that we have to remember now is that as we move into the fall, we're talking about providing that synchronous instruction. So a lot of those practices that we did within the classroom, we are able to do within that virtual synchronous environment. So we're able to also provide them those hard copies where they can have those graphic organizers and we can help them walk through that. We can break down the task. We can give them manipulatives. So if we have students that need those manipulatives to work through those math problems, we can provide those. So there's many options. And Mrs. Hughes, I know that you're well aware, they're individualized. So that's one of the reasons why we're looking at having those IEP meetings at the beginning of the year, because we recognize moving into providing that synchronous instruction, teams are really going to have to look through those accommodations and make decisions on which one of those are going to support that child in that environment.
Thank you.
Was there a second while we have you?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to, it's not about that, about where teachers will be teaching. And I know that Chesapeake, if teachers are teaching virtually, they'll be in the classroom. And you said that they would be given an option. There have been a lot of parents who have been emailing about the optics of being paid and doing the job of a full-time teacher, but being at home. I do not imagine we have teachers that are just spending an hour a day and then on vacation the rest of the day. But the optics of saying that the kids can't come back, but then not having teachers in the classroom, it seems to me, after listening to a lot of them, and they've been calling and they've been emailing, that, they were talking about how a teacher could be in the classroom, be able to use the board, be able to use whatever it is they normally use, and to live stream out as they're lecturing in the classroom. But then also the student would be able to go back and look at it later. And I don't know, to me, that just seems like a better way to do things. Why are we not doing that?
So we are going to be giving the teachers the option to teach from home or come into the classroom and access the materials and teach from there. We are looking at all types of technology solutions to engage kids in a synchronous environment, which could involve live streaming.
I would guess as an additional answer to that, the more germane question is probably, can they meet the expectations that we have for them for teaching, regardless of the environment? So if we find, to your point, that they can't meet the expectations that we have in terms of the daily schedule that's been set and the synchronous and the asynchronous learning that's going on and the ability to have good Wi-Fi connection and all of those things that they need, then we can direct them to be working out of the school facilities. But if we don't have to and they can meet those expectations, I'm not sure why we would, other than optics. And if I haven't seen an email to that effect, but perhaps if you've got some you could send to me, I can look at that and try to get a better understanding.
Okay, moving on to Mrs. Felton.
Thank you, Chair Rye. This question also deals with COVID and not speaking it to in existence, but it has come up that we had a case in one of our schools, and the question is, what will be the protocol? I know that we have to deal with the HIPAA procedure and things you can't, names you can't give out, but what would be the protocol if this would take place again in a school? And how soon will they know? I know that we are injecting a lot of things and trying to view it all in a real place, but just for the comfort's sake, just for the satisfaction mindset that we are looking at that, what would be the protocol if that would take place again or would take place in one of our schools if we did? This is a face-to-face.
Yeah, so I'm going to
situation.
ask Mr. Muir to step in for a second. I think he's right outside the door, but I'll begin with every case has to be dealt with on a case. Let me start with this. Every case has to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. And every case is dealt with on a case-by-case basis with the Virginia Department of Health. However, so Mary gets contacted by the supervisor, she contacts the Department of Health, and we begin working that case, right? But with that said, what we're seeing is a trend of different types of scenarios that can be expected. So John, can you talk a little bit about the scenario-based protocols?
Sure, thanks. In fact, we have a principal packet memo that's going out Thursday. It's going to all department heads, directors, and principals, and ultimately it'll be available for all employees. And HR has been working closely with Mary's office and Mary Shaw with everything going on and developing. We've identified about 9, this is for employees now, about 9 scenarios of different exposures. And so what we did is we developed step by step. If this, then that. And ultimately, I'm going to explain it just like that. First step is if you're an employee and if you had an exposure at home, depending on what kind of exposure it is, the first thing, or if you're feeling sick at work, you go right to your supervisor, you report it. From there, anyway, it'll go down the step for each scenario. We know it's like 3 or 4 pages long, but we believe over a period of time, this will make sure we're all handling each scenario the same way. And as time goes on, a principal or a department head may call the first time, But after they, you know, after they go through a couple scenarios of different exposures, or a teacher comes in and says, my husband has to self-quarantine, or my wife has to self-quarantine, this thing will guide them through it. And so we may have to tweak it as time goes on, but this will help pull it in and make sure we're being consistent. It also includes notifying employee relations. Dr. Spence actually did a great job answering the leave questions. There are all kind of various leaves out there, and it is a case-by-case basis. And all this, if you go to our, well, it'll be out there for employees to access. So, did that answer? I'm not sure who asked the question.
I asked the question, and when you put the last piece on that, it will be out there for employees to be able to get access to it and know what to do with it.
Yes.
That makes a lot of difference than just one person having information. If it's accessible to the employees.
It will be. In Thursday, we talked about it just earlier today. It's going into principal packet Thursday, and DOT, David's folks, are waiting to release it, and it'll be out there for everybody. Again, it takes a while. We can send you all a copy. Well, remember you asked for it. It's a little mind-boggling at first, but after you read through it a couple times, and so the goal is to make sure we're being consistent. Mary Shaw worked with Edie Rogan in employee relations, Cammie, Steve Lepak, and we made sure that it hits all the pieces. Now, we had to change it, and I'll stop here because I know we're getting late here, but we had to change it like just the day before we shared it with senior staff because the rules changed again a little bit in certain areas. So we will continue to monitor as stuff changes, and we've been all working together to make it happen. So,
Thank you. My second question, not unless you want to add anything to that, Dr. Spence? No? Okay. Second question is, we're talking about transportation, and I know you're working on hard, but I knew we had difficulties with transportation when school was on a regular schedule. Bus drivers and all the other scenarios. I'm hearing now with the social distancing that we will only put 26 students on a bus. And I'd like to see how that schedule, how would that play out? How would that schedule be if you had more than 26 or kids coming that had to be placed on that bus face to face, getting them back and forth? How would that work? Do we have other means of transportation, or will those children wait? I know you said we will not leave a child at the bus stop, but if you only have that scenario of distancing and only 26 students, how does that look?
So there's several questions in there. I'll try to make sure that I cover them. So we have a transportation committee. So anytime that you're limited so substantially from one year to the next in the number of students you can put on the bus, there are going to be what I'll call puts and takes. You have to put your priorities and you have to get together. We have a transportation committee, and you've seen the product that our transportation group puts out. They can define things within 15-minute blocks and understand where how many kids are on the bus. Unknown for this year is how many kids are going to sign up for transportation. That's why we talk about it's incredibly important that we're going to require that so we get that actual information. So right now we're going through planning using good estimations, but we need the real numbers to be able to understand. We've got a transportation committee where our transportation team is directly connected with docile leadership so that we can ensure that as we're making adjustments, we're hitting the right priorities. There are going to be adjustments that are going to need to be made, as you suggested, potentially as timing goes that are associated. The big thing, as Dr. Robertson mentioned earlier, is we want to ensure smooth transitions as we're going from one to the next. So that's something that we're going to be focused on.
Okay.
You talked about children not being left at the bus stop. So 22, I'll say this out loud, 22 kids on a bus, one child per seat as we're planning right now. It is a risk mitigation. And you've heard our physicians say it's all about balancing risk. So in the example that you described, we're going to be very specific with parents about what expectations are about what kids should do at the bus stop, that they need to be at the bus stop that they're assigned to, not somewhere else. But if we are in a situation where we are going to be faced with exceeding a 22, one child per seat, or leaving a child at a bus stop, the risk balance is you take that child, you get them to school, you provide feedback to the family, don't do it again. You do all the safety mitigations that you can, but it doesn't make sense from a risk management standpoint to say, hey, we're not going to accept you on for the risk of a disease, but we're going to leave you in a physically not so safe environment. Absolutely.
Okay.
You go now.
Mrs. Manning?
So, my next two questions, what PPE will be provided to students and staff? Is one of them?
So I'll talk, there's very specific PPE. When you talk about PPE, there's, that falls into mostly the medical world that will provide that PPE as, and.
I would include masks
Mary
in
Shaw and
that
her
as
team,
well.
yeah. So for these masks, we're in discussion about providing masks for our faculty and our students, for everybody. That's the track that we're on, that we're looking into right now.
Okay. And then the next one is a special ed question. One of the speakers asked this question, so I'd like to get an answer for it. So she said that her child has a one-on-one for an IEP. Will a paraprofessional be able to come to her home?
And the answer to that question is that's a case-by-case decision. And so, you know, the IEP team has to meet and they have to make that decision together. So if she has that question, what she should be doing is contacting the school, asking to meet with the IEP team to have that conversation. In general, we're not sending staff to schools or out individually to homes for different reasons, but if the team agrees to it and the individual agrees to it with the IEP team, that's something that they can work out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Mrs. Riggs? No? Okay. Mrs. Weems?
Oh, yes, I think. Okay. I think this will be for our doctors, who are still listening. You know, we've heard from speakers and we've gotten hundreds of emails about, you know, pay attention to the science, don't make this decision, you know, personal or political, science, data, data, data. And so, I've paid attention to that medical data. And so, you know, from the National Academy of Science, the CDC, the AAP, they all urge us to open our school buildings. According to the, and then also the CDC and a doctor that was on the panel earlier today said, and I'm quoting, a medical professional, an expert, not me, for kids, the flu is much dangerous than COVID. The cases of COVID for children in Virginia are 0.6%. There have been no deaths compared to 175 last year of the flu. According to the Foundation for Research and Equal Opportunities, children under 15 are 7 to 20 times more likely to die of the flu or pneumonia than COVID. So, you know, but we say the flu and all of a sudden we're like, you can't say this is the flu. I know it's the flu, but I know it's not the flu, but actually these doctors are telling us for kids, the flu is actually more dangerous. That's the data that I'm reading. So help me reconcile that, because I'm thinking if we're closing schools for a long period of time for the COVID, once a bad flu season comes, are we going to be having this same conversation again? Because we're going to be dealing with a lot more people hospitalized, adults and children, and a lot more deaths. So I just find it interesting that when we say that, and I know one of our colleagues in Chesapeake got chastised about saying it not too long ago, but that is what the data and this is what the experts are telling me. So help me reconcile this. I'm trying to listen to science and medical data.
I'm going to pause and see if either of the doctors want to respond. I certainly would like to speak a little bit to the flu comparison and share with you, you know, the concerns that our medical team, Mary in particular, has about that. So, You're talking about what happens to children with the flu,
Right.
right? So we're also talking about what happens to staff. And right now, COVID-19 deaths as of today in the United States, 152,000 since March. The flu deaths in the United States for 2018-19 were 34,000. You can't equivocate the flu and COVID when it comes to adults. And I understand what you're saying about children, and I'm going to defer to the doctors a little bit to talk about why we're also saying we should slow, we should step into this. I mean, essentially, what I'm trying to do is give us a plan to get in there with the data
Yeah.
and to not put some arbitrary timeline on it, but to say with the data, let's step in. But let's please stop trying to equivocate the flu and COVID. They are not the same thing.
And I said that, but
And
I know
I
they're not the
understand
same.
that
Yeah.
it is more it is difficult for kids with the flu, but from a staff perspective, you're dismissing the concerns of the teachers who are talking to you if you try to equivocate those two things.
Well, okay, I will disagree.
And
I'm not dismissing, but the majority of those cases too are not from the age group of our teachers. The majority of those
That's
are from
entirely untrue in the
are
state
from
of Virginia.
nursing homes or from nursing homes.
No, that's entirely untrue in the state of Virginia. You saw the data from Dr. Bergen earlier, and one of the largest age groups at the moment that's spiking is the 19 to 30-year-olds. That is the primary group that we hire to come and teach, and everybody else beyond that. And so I would argue that's just not true. And I would say, look, we could all do the data back and forth.
Right.
And we can play the data game. I think what we probably should do, Dr. Rowland, I don't know if you and Dr. Best are still on.
Yeah, hi.
Is maybe just give us some insight into.
Unfortunately, the comparison to the flu happens a lot because that is the only thing we really have to compare it to. So unfortunately, even though they do not act the same, and the age group that fares the worst is not necessarily the same between both the flu and COVID. Unfortunately, that's kind of what we're stuck with. Luckily, the one good thing about moving through the pandemic is that we are learning more data as each day goes on. So fortunately, we do have a little bit more to go on other than just comparing it to the flu. So I definitely understand from a non-medical perspective where you're trying to rectify hearing both that it is like the flu and also not like the flu at the same time. So definitely appreciate that.
Well, I brought it up because one of the people on our panel,
Stated that and gave me the statistics. So, and we've heard it from the community. Also, my second question is, I know there's been a lot of conversation about just sticking with the green, like Ms. Melnick said, green, yellow, red. We've had a lot of speakers with that. So the green is less than 26%. Is that right? Okay. 26 cases. Okay, less than 26. Right. Okay, so, and with the green, because I can't see this because it's about this small on my piece of paper, but refresh my memory, somebody, Dr. Bergen, with that green, if we stay in the green for 14 days, or does everybody go back, or is it still, can you just refresh me on that before I ask my question?
Yeah, if the test positivity rate was below 5%, and if the cases per 100,000 fell down below 10 cases per 100,000 per population, which again roughly equivalent to something like 26 and a half cases per day, then both of those, and Dr. Rowland, you jump in if I'm getting this wrong, but I think I'm right. If both of those over a 7-day average went into the green, then we would be recommending that all students go back to school.
Okay, so that's the all students. Okay, and the yellow was when you differentiated those grades.
So the differentiation between yellow, green, yellow, yellow, and green, green is this. That in the scenario where we hit yellow, yellow, that is where we would say it's time to bring back a select population of students, and we've defined them. And then we would say we're going to monitor this data, and as we continue to stabilize or trend downward, the BBCPS is going to then begin thinking about and talking about transitioning 7th and 8th grade students in 10, 11, and 12. But only once we've gotten to yellow, then we begin the process of monitoring the 7-day rolling averages and seeing if that data has stabilized and begun to downward trend.
Okay. Yeah, my thoughts and I guess fear is that green, with the parameters we're using, is going to be, in my opinion, extremely, extremely, extremely difficult to get to.
Oh, I would
Extremely.
agree, which is why we've left ourselves the space in order to bring students back
If not,
before we
if not
get to.
impossible, if not impossible throughout the whole rest of next year. Yeah,
I'm not
and-
gonna, go ahead, Dr. Rowland.
Speak to the green, I think, to be clear, none of the physicians are asking that we would open in our current state. We are way in the red, and I think that's a universal agreement. The green, while would be ideal, I think I agree, is going to be very hard to get to. And I think we need to be prepared that this pandemic is not going away next month or the month after that, or possibly into the next year. So all the more reason to take a good look at the data we have and use it appropriately.
Follow to that. Dr. Rowland, I think what we heard a lot of tonight was from teachers who were saying, well, I don't want to go back unless it's green. That happened. That was actually there were sort of two camps, and one camp was if it ain't green, don't go back.
Yeah.
And could you talk a little bit so that at least the board has context for why the physicians that work together on this, I think generally with perhaps one exception, felt like if we got into these yellow parameters that we could begin bringing students back to school safely?
Sure. When you look, it's very hard to understand what's going to happen. We don't know the future. But from looking at the patterns with this pandemic, we believe that it's going to take quite a bit of time to get into the green zone. We're just going to simmer here for a while. If we wait for green, it could be, and this is a guess, but that's a lot. Some of this is guesswork, but it could be 4 months, it could be 2 years. We don't know. So we really just need to make plans to use our mitigating strategies and get kids back to school safely, the ones while having that virtual option. The other issue was that the state of Virginia, with having that 10%, in a phase 3, is that if we hold schools more strictly to what we're holding the state to, then schools are not going to open and adults will continue to go out and do everything that they do. And kids have to be at home and not have the choice whether they stay at home or go back. So I hope that helps.
May I just say, I know it's possible, but I'll just say, how likely would this be if we're having what we would deem success with this yellow phase and the numbers are kind of stagnant in the community where it doesn't look like we're going to advance, we could come back for another conversation on adjusting, I would think. If we're still with just freshmen in high school, to say, well, look, I think we can bring back the seniors now or bring back the juniors and seniors. That's.
I think we could, and I won't speak for them, but I know that the physicians that we have worked with, including the ones you've met tonight, have said they will be here all along to support us and provide us with that guidance and advice as we continue to monitor the data.
Okay. Thank you. Mrs. Anderson?
Questions. The first one has to do with training of teachers. So can you explain to me when the training is going to take place for how you want them to teach virtually? Or, I think that's the biggest thing that is on teachers' minds, exactly how do you want them to prepare and how do you want them to do the lessons? And so I feel like, and I've talked to several teachers who've indicated they want to see the training sooner than later.
Sure.
So when is that training going to happen?
So we already started training teachers on different aspects of what we're expecting them to do. And we are working with the team to outline guidelines and expectations in terms of how they will teach. So, for example, Mrs. Hughes asked, what does that look like in terms of the blocks of time? So there'll be expectations that synchronous learning takes place in a reading block in either 3 or 4 increments. You use your data and you pull your groups, and they'll meet for either 20 minutes with 4 groups or 30 minutes with 3 groups. laying out those expectations. We have a team of our instructional technology specialists who are designing professional learning to assist with navigating the resources, some of which I shared with you earlier today. We have essential training that's being scheduled and planned for this summer. Our teachers are beginning to get that information, and they'll have that momentarily, shortly, throughout the summer, so they can sign that up. We don't have much of the summer left because we're going to start. I think they should start to see information if they've not already started to see it come out, but it will absolutely be soon. We'll know more after this meeting.
Are you giving them videos that they can?
Yes, we're also creating videos not only for our staff, but for administrators. We're creating videos for families, for parents in different languages to help
Okay.
support them and navigate them through the system.
My second question has to do with kindergarten specifically. Obviously, I taught kindergarten for 20-some years, so
Sure.
I'm concerned about these kindergarten students starting school virtually. It's really, I've had sleepless nights about it. And I'm wondering about the Virginia Kindergarten Readiness Assessment, because that's done on an individual basis. So would that be done virtually, one-on-one, the kindergarten teacher doing that one-on-one with the student? Or is there going to be help given to those kindergarten teachers so that they can?
So we're still having discussions with the state on how to navigate that, and they've not given clear direction with how we can do that on the virtual standpoint. So we're still awaiting confirmation and guidance from the state related to that. So as soon as we get that information,
Would it be
we'll
possible
communicate that.
even to bring those students into schools by appointment, one-on-one, to allow the teachers to do a one-on-one assessment? Or is that not possible?
Well, anything's possible. We'll just have to see what we're allowed to do as in terms of mitigation and things of that nature, and how we would be able to navigate that. Of course, with synchronous learning opportunities, we do have the opportunity to interact with students on the face-to-face. Although virtual, we do have that capability. So we'll just have to wait to see. We've inquired about what flexibility we have with being able to administer those assessments. We've just not gotten a definitive answer just yet.
And that's coming from the state, right? Or is
Yes.
it coming from UVA? I mean,
That
I
would
know
come-
the PALS assessment was from UVA, but this is particularly from the state, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I'm just going to sneak in my second question, and I think it was Dr. Robertson who first shared this information, but it could also be Dr. Rogers. Getting back to the class, and I hate to refer to kids as caseloads or workloads, but I'll say what you said about the virtual class itself could be larger, but in terms of the total teacher number of students, virtual teacher versus in-person teacher, is that going to be different or
Yes.
more?
Yes. We based upon the fact that if you choose option one, then you're choosing the option to go back face-to-face. And we know that when we go back face-to-face, we're going to have to abide by our health and safety mitigation guidelines, which will limit the number of students in a particular class. So it's not hard to imagine that, again, the example I use, when a teacher's typical class load is 150 students, that those classrooms are often 27, 28, 29 students. You can't put 27, 28, or 29 students in a face-to-face environment, option one. Now, of course, if all of our students choose option one, we're going to have to make room for them using our mitigation guidelines. So we'll be using the entire building as a learning environment. But let's just say that we get a percentage of our parents and families who choose option two, and that will certainly help us lower the number of students in a particular class. So our best guess at this point is if you are in option one, it is very likely you're going to have a smaller class load than if you are in the virtual learning center.
Okay.
And we won't know what that looks like until all the registrations are done by August 12th.
Yeah, I think that's the key point. We can't give you or our teachers definitive answers until we have gone back out and figured out what option our parents are selecting and figured out what option our teachers are selecting so that we can begin the process of scheduling the VLC and scheduling our regular schools and beginning to balance course loads like we would do any other time. And until we have those two things in front of us, I don't think we can give you a definitive answer to these questions about will they have more class. There may be some teachers who have more and some teachers who have less. It's really hard to say just yet.
I would think we would keep within the general guidelines, though, like you mentioned, the 150. We're not looking at teacher caseloads
Yeah,
of
no
200.
teacher would have, no, absolutely not, because they're only teaching 3 classes.
Gotcha, thank
So,
you. Okay, Miss Owens.
Thank you. My questions are in regards to the, I guess, metrics used for our 5 to 10% yellow zone. So hopefully the doctors and school admin can weigh in a little bit. My first one is, can you speak to the beach schools' number of military homes and what considerations, if any, we've taken to consider that the active duty member positive tests are not being reported within the regional VDH stats and how that disproportionately may affect our district?
I'm going to let Dr. Rowland speak specifically to that. Roland. I keep saying Rowland. I know it's Roland.
That's a great question. I can look into that more for you. I know it came up during our meeting, so I can certainly, I don't want to misspeak and say something incorrect. So I can look into that more. I believe that we were starting to take into account, but I knew that was one of the issues. So let me look into that and I'll find out for you.
And if I may, just to put in perspective, just having a little bit of background here, a large portion of the families here, although they have a spouse who's a service member, they receive their care not necessarily at the medical facility.
Right.
So just to create so for everybody's perspective, it's not like the entire military population is not being reported. It's only those that are receiving that care on an installation, and a large portion of the population, the way that their insurance works is they elect to go out in town for their care.
Right.
Just
My
for
understanding is that all the active duty personnel, the service member, is receiving their care on the installation, and then all the dependents can choose whether they're getting it on the installation or not. So I was trying to understand, like, what number of households do we have in our division where we have an active duty member that we wouldn't have included in the stats?
This is Heidi Best. I actually have a couple of contacts over at the Portsmouth Naval Hospital, and I could reach out to them to see what their local incidence is. I mostly work at Princess Anne Hospital in Southern Virginia Beach, and I will say that we do see a large population of military dependents. Active duty military members still can choose to go to any ER. They don't have to go to Portsmouth Naval for all of their care or to the local bases for all of their care. So we do also see active duty patients in our emergency rooms in the community.
Okay, thank you.
I'll say as well, we also have a very large population of military that we care for in our outpatient general pediatrics clinics and also at CHKD. So it's not as if all of those military families aren't being cared for within the system that is registering the data on the VDH website.
Do we have a number about
how many of those
households are in our district? Like, we
the,
fill out
the cards, the federal cards every year? Do we know what number, what percent of our district's households are in that?
Yeah, so the number typically hovers around 20,000. 20,000 students. So that doesn't necessarily equate to households. A lot of those are multiple multiple children in the same household, and then also those are not all necessarily installation-based or active duty. They're federally related. So you've got people who work for Back Bay Wildlife Refuge, for example, and people who are civilians who work on base and other things. So it's really hard to give you that number tonight, but we keep it. I can tell you what the active duty households are.
Go ahead.
And then my second question still is within that 5 to 10% yellow zone questioning. I understand why we're looking at the entire region, eastern region. I think it's important for all the reasons that were given. But what I don't understand is when we're at a yellow, and looking to bring students back in for face-to-face instruction, why we wouldn't then look at the Virginia Beach specific numbers to confirm that the city is also in the yellow zone, particularly since we're getting to a point now where we're seeing mayors doing city-specific measures when cities are outside of the range of what we're seeing in the general region.
So I don't know if any of our physicians want to talk about whether or not there would be value add to that.
So to clarify, are you saying that if we were in red, and the, as a small mini region, you would be concerned that we weren't looking at that?
No, I'm saying if our region, if we have a yellow.
And so we have maintained whatever, and we're looking at bringing face-to-face instruction back into our schools. At that point, before we bring the children back for face-to-face instruction, can we then take just the city of Virginia Beach metrics and see if we are at the 10% or less for Virginia Beach specifically? If we are at 9% for the region, but Virginia Beach is at 12%, is that a factor to be considered before we go face-to-face if we're saying that 10% is the lower risk zone? Sorry, I know we're never going to use the word safe zone in regards to this, but the lower risk zone.
I guess my question would be, would you feel more safe if in the eastern region it was all red, but Virginia Beach was green?
I would probably want to. I'd feel more safe erring on the side of more caution for the city than less caution for the city. And so it might mean that if the city was somehow in green, but the rest of the region was in red, I would feel less safe about us going back to school because we just said that we have teachers and parents who go to those red zones and are coming back and forth. So I think I personally, as a parent and whatever, would feel more safe knowing that our school district was looking at that 10% that we are feeling is a lower risk category, both for the region and then confirming that our city is in that lower risk 10% as well.
Sure, and I understand your concerns. So what the decision was made for the to use the eastern region wasn't, I know it was the recommendations of the VDH, but also that as you may know, that the lines between, say, Virginia Beach and Norfolk are not very hard lines, so a lot of people travel across. And so if one region is elevated, then it is very highly likely that other regions are elevated. And we particularly wanted to use the eastern region actually to be more inclusive and to be more cautious, meaning that if it looked like regionally things were escalating, and even if they were good in Virginia Beach or seemingly good in Virginia Beach, we would still continue to use the eastern region's data. I will say, so I work in the emergency departments from Virginia Beach, Norfolk, and Suffolk. And I'll tell you that as much as we would love to feel that like our community is separated from one another, it very much is not. So I would say that the data in the eastern region, particularly in southern Hampton Roads and even up to the peninsula, is very indicative of what's happening here locally.
And I add to Dr. Best's point, I would say that to try to separate Virginia Beach out, which was sort of our starting point when we were brainstorming in the group, is just a false separation. It's just not real for the reasons that Dr. Best specified, is that, you might live in Virginia Beach, but your doctor's office is in Norfolk. You went to an emergency department. There's just so much fluidity that there's no real way to separate it out. And that was why the Virginia Department of Health said you can't just look at Virginia Beach, you must consider the whole eastern region. So I definitely understand where you're coming from, but I think there's just no way to draw those lines. So
Okay. By the way, doctors, thank you for being with us at this hour. This is Carolyn Rye. Okay, Mrs. Hughes.
as people are asking about all of the numbers for how you're going to distribute students, it gets more complicated. People are emailing in questions. One person wants to know how out of zone requests are going to be handled, but then another person also to the same thing said if she gets to choose, she would choose option A, but she can only do that if her out of zone request is approved. If not, she has to have B. Will they have waiver decisions before they have to make a choice of whether it's option 1 or option 2 for their family?
Likely not to that specific question. And if folks have specific questions, it's probably easier just to email those to us so we can reach out to them and have that conversation. And the reason I say likely not, just for this broad conversation, is we need, we base out of zone often, not just on the need of the family, but on staffing and space availability. And until we have staffing and space availability in place, which we can't do until we know what people are selecting, we wouldn't be able to make that determination.
Another one, Mrs. Hughes, or is that it? Okay, Mrs. Weems.
Yes, thank you. Either, I guess this is a Dr. Rogers or a Dr. Spence. I think the educational data is pretty one-sided in the fact that, and I think that we've heard from teachers, parents, and y'all, our own staff, that in-person learning is, by far better than virtual learning. And I think that, 100% virtual learning, and I think that we probably, I don't know, have data to this, maybe not, but I think it's going to undoubtedly harm our most vulnerable students. And I think those students are going to be students in poverty, those with IEPs and 504 plans, minorities, and our English learners. So these achievement gaps are already big, and to me, not having face-to-face instruction is just going to widen these gaps. So especially if we're talking about, like the doctor said, to get in that green zone, it could be 4 months, it could be 2 years. That is really, really concerning to me. And I know a board member in Norfolk was very passionate about this to his colleagues the other day. So my question is, what are we going to do with those groups of people? Because they are the ones that are going to suffer the most.
Yeah. So, I think that is a great opportunity to clarify a mischaracterization, which has been like, we want all virtual, right? That's one mischaracterization. And on the other side is the mischaracterization that we want all kids back in yesterday, And so what we're trying to accomplish is getting kids back as quickly as possible, as safely as possible. That's the plan that we've outlined to the best of thinking of the professional staff that you have here working with the health experts that we've been working with, right? What I've been clear about all through this since we closed in March has been, this is not great for kids. Like, this is not great for kids. I agree with that. I agree with the Wall Street Journal article. I agree with my superintendent colleagues. We've talked about that. We've talked about that together, that this is surfacing and highlighting and amplifying equity issues that already existed in our community, that existed in our system before we closed, and that exist now and are getting worse. And you've heard our pediatricians talk about the kids that they're seeing and what it's doing to them. There should be no assumption on the part of anybody that this administration thinks that the best thing to do is keep kids away from school. So, if we could just start with that presumption and stop with that mischaracterization that, and I'm not speaking to anybody in the room, I'm just saying, that we've heard over and over and over again, and we heard tonight a bunch, that Dr. Spence wants kids to stay out of school. No, I don't. And no, we don't. My team doesn't. The plan doesn't say that. The plan says we want people in school. So thank you for giving me the chance to clarify that. And now let me say, but in the case where we have to be virtual, and there are likely going to be a lot of students that you're describing who will opt for virtual, because you're talking also about communities that have been more affected by COVID-19 than other communities. And so they're more likely to be concerned about having a child go to school and then come home when they've got issues in the home relative to pre-existing conditions, relative to family members who've already been exposed and those sorts of things. We have to have a plan. We have to work hard to make sure that virtual learning now looks different than what students experienced in the spring. That's part A. And you've heard us say over and over again, we're working on that. We're working very hard to ensure that it looks different. If anybody here expects it to be flawless or perfect, you're barking up the wrong tree. Okay? Any more so than you've heard me for years. Those of you who have heard me talk in our legislative conversations about how we had a guy out in Southwest Virginia for the first 4 years I was here trying to implement something called Virginia Virtual, which was going to be a choice for parents as like the solution. And I kept saying it's not the solution. And now all of a sudden we're all realizing it's not the solution, but we're going to make it as good as we can make it. And that will include providing additional one-on-one synchronous sessions with our reading specialists for students, as a for example, and because we're monitoring for attendance and because we're looking at grades, we're going to know when are kids struggling, when are they slipping. We'll know immediately who doesn't have access, and we'll get that access to them. And then we're going to send out the support that we can send out virtually, or in some cases, like for example, with our social workers in person. So I don't suggest to you, I don't suggest to any member of the board it'll be perfect. It's going to be detrimental to students to be in a virtual environment, which is why we want to have the data situated in such a way that we can get kids back as quickly as we can safely. But as at least one of the physicians I spoke to recently, who may or may not be on the call, said to me, you just don't bring people back in the middle of a wildfire. And that's where we are right now. And you heard earlier the physicians say, look, nobody would say come back now. It's just we're in a substantial community spread. And so we just have to make a decision for how we get school started so that we can plan, we can train, we can schedule. And then we have to have the data to tell us when we get back. That's what our plan's all about. So I just want to, I hadn't had the opportunity. I listened to 60 speakers who divided just about evenly on the fact that Dr. Spence thinks that all kids should be out of school and Dr. Spence thinks all kids should be in school, and everybody, thinks our plan was sort of trying to do something that it wasn't. And what our plan is trying to do is get kids in as quickly as we can, as safely as we can, understanding the science and the data. Okay. And you all are pointing out some of the science and data. You're saying it isn't as harmful for kids. That's true, but it can be harmful for staff without the right mitigations in place. And so making sure there isn't substantive community spread is important, because the CDC and the AAP and everybody else has talked about tonight all say administrators first need to look at community spread, and they need to rely on the advice of local health experts to say when, not how, but when to get school open. That's what we did. That's the plan that we've put in front of you.
Okay, well, yeah, thank you. I just want to clarify that I was going to say this later, but you just gave me the great segue to do it now. I wrote down some of the comments that I took issue with. And one was that one speaker said Dr. Spence and his staff, they don't care about us, the employees. And so, I would just want to say that I certainly don't believe that, and I certainly don't believe that y'all have, some agenda. I think all 11 of us, I think all staff, we care about kids, and we care about safety, we care about health, we care about our employees. We may differ in opinions on how we're going to get there. So I know we all have thick skin, but I just wanted to say that I took issue with people blaming you and your staff for not caring about kids or about staff. And so I will always say that I don't think that's true at all. I think it's absolutely the opposite. And I would just hope that when we get blasted after tonight, no matter how we vote and judge in the wrong way, that we can stand up and say, if I want choice, or if I want school to start virtually or face-to-face, no matter, it doesn't mean I don't care about safety, it doesn't mean I don't care about education, it doesn't mean I don't care about minority groups. We're just trying the best here, so hopefully we can support each other, at least in that. So, thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Melnick.
And thank you for that. I just, as many of us have probably been awake for 19 hours already today, I just wanted to take this moment to thank you all for the 5+ months of work that have gone into this planning. The physicians that were here tonight, that really kind of set the record straight for us this evening. I am truly grateful for that. And I think that the hardest part in this whole thing is that because this is such a nightmare and so much of this is so unknown, that basically what we're saying is that we have to start trusting people. And so we have to trust the people who have hundreds of years of experiences and our attorneys to lead us through these murky waters, and people on our staff who have, as I told Mr. Freeman earlier, who have been combat ready their entire lives, their entire adult life. I mean, we have to start trusting these people again. But more importantly, we have to trust our teachers, and they're ready. This is very difficult for them. This is not going to be easy, but we really have to start lifting our teachers, and we have to embrace this as a community, because this is not a Virginia Beach issue. This is a worldwide issue, and we need to now propel our teachers back up to rock star status. They achieved that back in March when parents were, singing their praises, that they didn't realize how difficult this was, and we need to be there again. I like social media for the good stuff. I invite my colleagues again, as I've said 100 times before, start following some of these teachers on Twitter because they're great at it. They love to share what they're doing. Twitter, the teachers are full, just the ideas, and their heads are spinning, and they're collaborating and sharing all of this great stuff. And it makes me really proud. But this is really, really difficult. And so thank you. Thank you for everything that you've done to get us to this point. And hopefully we will be able to send you forward with our support. Thanks.
Mrs. Felton?
Thank you, Chair Ryan. And this is what I'm going to say. Probably take 2 questions time. But as you all have heard me say time and time again, I still stand on the belief that every child has a right to a quality education, from access to resources and engagement in the classroom. Virginia Beach continues to be ahead of the curve in providing quality to our students' population. Over the last few months, I have wrestled with the idea of ongoing virtual learning and instruction in for our children. A great many of our children rely on the security and familiarity of a brick and mortar building where not only do they receive a quality education provided by the Virginia school system, they have a sense of community amongst their peers. Some have a safe haven in the structured environment, and most of all, they build upon the important skills they can develop in classroom settings such as communication skills, problem solving, and other dynamics. But the public health challenge that we are facing today with the COVID-19 pandemic and having no blueprint to follow, as this is an unprecedented situation for us all, I truly have to reflect on the well-being of not only our students, but the teachers, administration, and staff, and consider what is in the best interest of the entire Virginia school system. In this situation, there is not one single decision that is in a win-win decision other than focusing on the safety of our students and staff. When we put safety in first priority, that is a win for all parties. Knowing that there is no perfect solution as we approach the discussion of reopening the schools, whether it be in-person instruction, virtual learning, or a combination of both, I must rely on the professionalism of the Virginia Beach school system superintendent and his staff. For the health and safety of our students, teachers, administration, staff, and the community at large, I will support the next steps of the superintendent. I know that on the front end, this may seem an inconvenience to parents and even students, but I would rather take strong measures to be safe and keep our Virginia Beach City Public School families safe and healthy. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Riggs?
I want to thank Carolyn Weems. I think you kind of expressed how we all feel, that we're all here for our students, our teachers, everyone, and there's no one that's looking at hurting anyone. We all are trying to support with what we believe is the best thing. But I do want to thank everybody, especially Dr. Spence and his administrative staff. You've worked so hard, and I've said it many times to you, and I do not want to be in your shoes, even though we are the ones that have to make the final decision. you have put the hard work in, and I know that. And I appreciate all of you guys. You've all worked so hard. Um, and I know that you're keeping, I know that your heart is with the students and the teachers because this is where you've been your whole life. And so I know that what you will advise to do tonight has been because you think it's the best thing to do. Um, I want to support you with what you say and what you recommend, but I also want to support what I know many of the teachers are feeling, and that's the fear. So I do want to say that. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Anderson.
I want to start off my remarks with stating that I, along with several of my colleagues, have read all the emails that have been sent to us and listened to all the speakers tonight, as well as studied and researched the issue of returning to school this fall. My wish and my goal is for schools to open with in-person instruction as soon as it's safe to do so. Safe. That key word is safe. Safety of our students, teachers, and staff is paramount to everything else. I'm extremely upset about our students not being able to have face-to-face instruction because as a former teacher, I know for a fact and fully understand that students perform and learn much better when they have in-person instruction. However, I'd like to clear up a few misconceptions as well as some misleading bits of information that have been given to the public. I've spoken with several teachers and parents who really do want to return to school this fall, but they only want to go back if it's safe to do so. So I'm very much in favor of that as well, if it's safe, and only if we can guarantee that it's safe for our students and teachers and staff. The first misleading bit of information sent in several emails to us was used in, and also was used in the alternative plan, is from the American Academy of Pediatrics that leads the public to believe that we should just send our students back to school without any worries. Because that's what supposedly that's what the CDC says, that's what the American Academy of Pediatrics says. However, if you go on to read, and as was pointed out to us earlier this evening, if you go on to read the American of Pediatrics message, it also goes on to say, and I'm going to repeat this, it says, quote, returning to school is important for the healthy development and well-being of children, but we must pursue reopening in a way that is safe for all students, teachers, and staff. Science should drive decision-making on safely reopening schools. Public health agencies must make recommendations based on evidence, not politics. We should leave it to health experts to tell us when the time is best to open up school buildings and listen to educators and administrators to shape how we do it. I believe we need to be transparent about what the experts and credible organization articles tell us. But if we don't read or quote the entire article, it's really misrepresenting the information. The article goes on to say, the same article goes on to say, local school leaders, public health experts, educators, and parents must be at the center of decisions about how and when to reopen schools, taking into account the spread of COVID-19 in their communities and the capabilities of school districts to adapt safety protocols to make in-person learning safe and spread and feasible. For instance, schools in areas with high levels of COVID-19 community spread should not be compelled to reopen against the judgment of local experts. A one-size-fits-all approach is not appropriate for return to school decisions. Basically, the American Academy of Pediatricians article says it's the goal to reopen schools, not the reality. Some of the emails we've received also refer to the most recent CDC articles, and however, the CDC also says implementation should be guided by what is feasible, practical, acceptable, and tailored to the needs of each community. The remainder of that article lists protocols that are neither reasonable or even logistically possible for VBCPS to entertain at this time. In fact, the CDC is actually very careful not to actually say one way or another about schools actually opening, only that schools are vital and provide more than academic support, but rather they focus on providing mitigation and preventative protocols. In fact, they have an entire article that was pointed out this evening dedicated to helping parents decide what is best for their families based on multiple factors in regards to sending students back to school. It's also interesting to see that their first recommendation to administrators is for them to consider the transmission rates in the community. As it says, key considerations for school administrators. The first thing on that list is COVID-19 transmission rates in the immediate community and in the communities in which students and teachers and staff live. My opinion about all of this is that it should not be a political decision. We need to make a decision based on science and the locality and community transmission of the virus. And I can tell you from a personal point of view, personally it has affected me, that this virus leaves damage in the people that have recovered from it. I personally know of recovering individuals that have permanent lung and heart damage from the virus, my mother and sister. We don't know what effects the virus has on individuals that have had mild effects. And that's what worries me about students, because there's so much about this disease that is unknown at this time. We do know that some viruses can stay in the body, and I talked about this earlier this evening, and the doctor said they don't think that this could happen, but he, how can he say that? I'm sorry to refute his wording, but there's an awful lot that's not known about this virus at this time. We don't know what this virus will do to people years from now. As a former kindergarten teacher and one that has pushed for all-day kindergarten in every elementary school, it pains me. It pains me to have kindergarten students start school with virtual learning. I almost want to cry. I have had sleepless nights about it. I already feel horrible also about all the other students not having face-to-face instruction to start this year. However, if a teacher, student, or staff member gets critically sick or worse yet dies because they get infected with this virus at school, the grief and anxiety will live in me forever. So I'm going to say that I also will support the administration's plan to go forward tonight. I just had to get a lot of that off my chest, and I hope y'all don't mind me reading all that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Owens.
Thank you. Not sure if we're still in the questions phase because I still had a couple. I figure we're here. We need to. Yeah, it still says questions up there, and let's make sure that we have them all. I want to have a good understanding before we have to vote on this serious issue. One of the things that was mentioned in the presentation is that the issue of students wearing masks in the building would be considered a discipline issue, and it would be categorized either as disruption or insubordination if there's, continued issues with having to address the mask situation with students. I was hoping you can, speak a little bit more onto that and will that be tracked with our disciplinary statistics and issues in our overall, how does that look on a child's record, et cetera? So, thank you.
Yeah, I think what you heard is the expression of we'll have to have something that gives us some teeth if we've just got a fully non-compliant student who just says every day, I'm not wearing my mask, I'm gonna take it off, I don't care, you can do what you want. We'll work, obviously, because it is that cultural shift that Mr. Freeman talked about, that, and we know it's gonna be a shift. We'll work on a daily basis with a student who has difficulty with the mask, with their families, to understand the importance of it, the health reasons for it. We'll be providing those, as you heard Mr. Freeman talk about. So, it isn't one of those like you show up and we're going to you show up at the bus stop without it, you're going to put one on before you get on the bus. We see you getting off the bus with it, we're going to stop you, you're going to put it back on. So we're not going to immediately go to something that lands you, on your disciplinary record, but just something that we have that we can say to a parent, look, this can become a disciplinary issue if we don't get this under control, just like we would with most things that come up.
Was
Can I
that,
say something a little bit lighthearted on that fact? I was talking to a pediatrician in Northern Virginia who told his school, well, do you get them to wear shirts? So, you know, it's kind of like that. You're enforcing wardrobe issues already. So if they can wear shirts, they can wear masks. I've been very surprised at kids being able to tolerate them in my office. It's gone a lot better than I thought. And certainly we will, as pediatricians in the community, really try to create a standard so that you're not having random excuses for not wearing a mask. You know, if we need to work with IEPs, 504s, figure out how to keep the child 6 feet from the teacher, work with occupational therapy, that's been brought up as an issue. So we can support this in the school system, but you already enforced the shirts, so you can do this.
Okay, thank you.
And I guess two, right? Yeah. Okay. Is there a way for a dashboard to be developed? I guess I don't know if that's going to be the wording that would be kept specific for each school on our COVID page, where we're able to anybody in the community can click and link in and see updated information regarding the number of positive cases in the school, quarantines, and percentage of students with mask waivers. That way, at the end of this first semester, as a parent making an informed decision about what I'm going to do after the end of the first virtual semester, it might be a factor to me to know I'm sending my child to a school where there is a 50% mask waiver rate and 20 kids per class versus whatever else. You know,
Well, for starters, there isn't going to be a 50% mask waiver rate, but you know, I understand the point. And I'm going to have to get back to you on that because I'm concerned about the degree to which that sort of dashboard of cases creates issues with personally identifiable information, and I'd want to talk to the health department about that.
Okay. Mrs. Weems.
Yeah, a couple things. Well, I think, and Ms. Anderson, it just kind of made me. Oh,
I almost put you up there.
But the hard thing about this is even when we listen to science and data and our medical professionals, we could have a doctor in every one of these seats and they would have different opinions. They would have different opinions about, I mean, I can read off from very well-respected doctors in Chesapeake and Virginia Beach that email me, like, why are y'all doing this? Or why wouldn't you do this? Or I would send my kids to school September 7th, and then you'll have another doctor exactly say the opposite. So, I mean, that's the hard thing about it. I mean, and then you kind of, because of our own biases and personal experiences, we may think a little bit differently and choose to agree with some of the things that the doctors say. I mean, you kind of alluded to that, Ms. Anderson. So I think that's, you know, a tough point too. But I know it was mentioned, and I've mentioned it before, and I know one of our doctors and several of our speakers mentioned it, the kind of unintended consequences of isolation and not having kids in the building. I'm on a task force, a separate task force that we talk about this a lot with drug and alcohol abuse. The misuse of drugs and alcohol have just skyrocketed during this. Other psychological and social problems that I have heard from doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists and social workers are emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, sex trafficking, increase in drug and alcohol use, mental health disorders, depression. We were quoted a statistic today. And those are, you know, it's something I can't give you data on. We don't have data. But to me, those are going to linger on for years and decades. And and you know, we can say, you know, virtually our counselors are going to be there, but what are we going to do with this group of people who are so struggling? And it's not just our students, it's our teachers, it's our parents at home. But I'm really concerned about that with all the lockdowns and things shutting, and now our schools where some of these, to cut out face-to-face time with students, it might be cutting the only potential lifeline that those students have because of their home situation or whatever. And so what are we doing besides a virtual call to somebody at the school? I just don't know how we're gonna reconcile that or make up for that.
So we won't have all the answers for you, but I can tell you, Mr. Jameson, his team have been working quite a bit with their school counselors about how to work with families on some of these issues and the resources that we can provide. We're working closely to continue to expand our community partnerships so that we have folks who are available in the community for people to get to. We've been exploring teletherapy as an option for students who, not just a call to the school, but actually to a professional who can help them. One of the physicians who was on this work group is the head of psychiatric medicine for one of the local hospitals, and so offered to partner with Mr. Jameson as well to continue to expand what's available and what the resources that are available to our families. So I say all that to say we recognize the issue, and we're not in any way trying to discount the issue. The tightrope we're all walking on here is how to address that issue at the same time as addressing the other safety concerns, which, again, is why I'll make the case for my plan, which says get them back as quickly as you can, as safely as you can.
Mr. Edwards.
Well, there's a reason why we're here on Wednesday morning. And I'm pretty proud of it. Because we've had the guts to not only address how we should open, but when we should open, in terms of specificity, in terms of where we are medically, and in terms of the virus. And the fact that we are, I think, is testimony to the fact that Dr. Spence and the staff, I think, correctly read all of us on the board is wanting to get students back in the building as soon as we can. And that's why they've come up with the parameters that they've got in the plan. And I just want to express my appreciation. I mean, all of the other divisions around us and around the state have made, quote, decisions, but not decisions based on the degree of specific intent that we're grappling with here tonight. And it's because we want to get kids back in the class, face to face. And Dr. Spence, I thank you and all of your staff, and especially the medical panel, particularly those that are still hanging in here with us. Thank you. And I think we will serve our students better by having had your advice. Thanks.
Thank you. Mrs. Manning.
Thank you. I just want to piggyback a little bit off of what Ms. Weems said earlier. There have been some nasty comments going on out there about those of us who have a different viewpoint, who want to advocate for choice. It has been said because we want to advocate for a choice, that we're playing Russian roulette with a gun, or that we want our kids and staff to be canaries in a coal mine. And I take great offense to that. We may have our differences on this board, but I know that each and every one of you care about our students and our safety and staff safety, as well as our students' education. I know that Dr. Spence and his staff are putting that at the top of their mind as well. And I greatly appreciate all of the effort that has gone into it. I just have a different viewpoint. I'm the parent of Virginia Beach students myself, as well as have many close friends who are teachers and staff members. So I hope you know that I as well care about our students and our staff. I believe that the current metrics that are being used in the green, yellow, and red will not permit our middle and high school students perhaps to ever get back to in-person learning. So that's one of my big concerns with this plan. I've done a lot of research and spoken to many people, including medical experts. As Ms. Weems said, I've spoken, seen some of the same messages that she's gotten. Every medical professional that I've spoken to directly over the last several weeks has stated that the negative effects of not opening our schools outweigh the risks of COVID. So that's kind of the viewpoint that I'm coming from here. Specifically, the rise in suicidal ideations, as well as anxiety and depression from isolation among not only kids but adults. Dr. Mitchell just earlier this evening said that he's seen a 23% increase in depression in his patients. As a couple of our speakers said earlier, our kids can go to Target, the beach, Walmart, or work in an oceanfront restaurant, but they can't go to school. I personally believe we could make this work and we could return to school safely. So I'm now making a substitute motion based upon recommendations by medical experts, including the AAP and CDC, as well as parent and staff questionnaires. My motion proposes that we allow parent choice for in-person or virtual learning to begin at the start of the school year. My motion supports the superintendent's recommendations regarding social distancing measures and mitigation strategies to include providing proper PPE to protect our staff. I support Dr. Spence's recommendations with the following changes. Allow choice to begin at the beginning of the school year and create a guide to monitor COVID conditions based upon hospitalization data. Thank you.
So I think this is the time where I ask for a second. Mrs. Hughes, second. Discussion. Mrs. Melnick?
While I appreciate that opinion, we have a doctor right here that just said we are in the red zone, and she absolutely disagrees with opening right now. And so with that, I could not support that.
Is there anybody else who cares to comment? Mrs. Anderson, and then Mr. Edwards.
The idea to allow parents to choose either virtual learning or in-person school is not well thought out. It gives hope for working parents that have to get back to work and worry about childcare. It gives them hope during school hours. It gives them hope that they have, they don't have to worry about where their children are during the day and if they're who's going to help them do their classes. I would even argue as a former teacher that students attending for face-to-face instruction will fare better with their education. Dr. Spence even talked about that earlier, how much he really wants to get kids back in school. However, rolling the dice at this time and hoping that students and teachers and staff will not contract the virus is not what I want to do. In the face of this pandemic we're enduring at this time, and without any immunization against the virus, I'm not willing to sacrifice the lives of students and teachers and staff to go back with everybody full-time right now. You can argue that it's proven that young students don't contract the virus or spread it, but we know that children do get the virus, and in most cases only show minor symptoms. However, those children can transmit the virus to other people and their teachers and their parents and grandparents and other students. And as a former teacher, that has also had snot and vomit accidentally spewed on me in the past. It frightens me that we would put students, teachers, and staff in a situation where small particles can float in the air to infiltrate people just by them breathing. Please be aware that the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics, which Mrs. Manning cites as part of her article that she put out, also recommends that we send students back to school if it's safe.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards.
Yeah, I've heard the Walmart Target line so many times, and when I had a brief dialogue with Mrs. Weems, I told her I absolutely supported the concept of her alternative, and I still do, but I think it's totally unworkable from a numbers standpoint. If you go to Walmart, you got to wear a mask, and you have to socially distance. We can't do that. I don't want to ask Dr. Spence to, because it sounds good and feels good and is the right thing to do, to try to do it when I know doggone well he can't. Because you just, we can't make it work. So, and I will add that I think I am worried about Mrs. Manning's comment relative to her senior never setting foot back inside the building. We've got to make sure that 5% may not be the right number. It may be 6 or 7 or something other. If I vote to approve this plan tonight, that 5% is not locked in concrete, and I think would need to be revisited, because I'm scared to heck that we're not locking in on something that's going to keep students, the green students out of school for the year. Hopefully not even a semester. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Holtz?
Can you hear me? I really would like to vote for this. I want to see every child in the classroom with the teacher. As a retired teacher with 38 years of experience, I know the classroom environment well. And I can tell you right now, it is not safe. I want to vote to have students involved in sports and athletics. That would be fantastic when it's safe. And I also want to vote so kids can socialize and have fun. There's nothing so joyful to a teacher to see that. But it is not safe, and I definitely will not be voting for this option. Thank you.
Ms. Owens?
Thank you. I want to say that I think parental choice and voice is important. Parents know their children's needs, and parents live with the issues and challenges of the choices on a day-to-day basis. But like was mentioned by the doctor here with the seatbelt analogy, even parental choice has some limitations for safety. I think that we are working in a fallacy when we use the term when it's safe. Obviously, we want things to be safe. I think a more realistic term is when it's safer. We are never going to be able to say it's safe. As much as I would love for us to be able to make guarantees to teachers and students, there are no guarantees in life. I want to say that I wouldn't be in support of the proposal that Ms. Manning made, and I would like to also propose an alternative. I want to say that I hear the concerns when people are saying the disadvantaged populations and the children who are having safety issues and other issues in their homes, and that my proposal does keep those students in mind. Certainly when we're looking at the low-income families in our community, I understand and I empathize. I needed help for the first half of my son's life. I lived in Twin Canal in subsidized housing. SNAP subsidized our food. I parented as a single parent. My son had an IEP. I understand the needs and challenges involved with advocating for a child's unique and individual needs. The concerns related to children who rely on the schools for their safety are always in the forefront of my mind. As a forensic interviewer, I interviewed those children, those students for our local police. I currently am working 40 hours a week as a CPS hotline specialist. So kids that show up at the hospitals with abuse and neglect or come to the attention of our police or by concerned neighbors, they call CPS, and I take those calls to dispatch the on-call workers across the state. I get off at 11:30 p.m., 5 days a week, and so those children's stories are the last thing I hear before I go to sleep. So all of those issues are always in the forefront of my mind. With those concerns there, I still believe that we need to protect the safety of our staff and our members in those high-risk communities who are relying on grandparents as their home safety factors or older relatives as their backups for childcare. I would like to propose an alternative of keeping the current plan in terms of the designated groups, our special education, our English as a second language, et cetera, who are listed as designated, keeping it as Dr. Spence has proposed. And for the rest of the populations, I would propose that we use Virginia Beach positivity rates, not instead of the regional statistics, but in addition as the final check marker before moving into the face-to-face for an additional safety measure for our teachers. And so that would be my proposal.
Let me interject with Madam Attorney. So we have one substitute motion on the floor right now.
You can do one substitute. Ms. Owens will be the last one before you have to vote.
Okay, and so for procedural, that would be my substitute motion, not my proposal. Thank you.
I'm still, the substitute to which motion? We have two on the floor now. Okay.
You can have two amendments to a motion. So this is the last one, and you have to vote. If she gets a second to it, that's the last time you can vote it. You would have to vote on hers, and you can't take another one until you voted on hers. So you can only have two amendments or substitutes to a motion per your bylaws. So if Mrs. Owens gets a second, you have to vote on that one before you do anything else. What? Correct, then you would go back, but you could not do another one. You can't, nobody can offer an amendment or a substitute to Mrs. Owens after this, if she gets a second. So you can do discussions, you just can't offer another substitute if there's a second on Mrs. Owens.
So to clarify, you're offering an amendment to the.
It doesn't really matter which one, it could either be a substitute or it could be an amendment, but this is the last one if there's a second.
Cammy, could
But it's to the division proposed plan.
Cammy, could it be that they take a vote on the first substitute motion, and then if that passes, that's totally different anyway than what Ms. Owens has. And if it doesn't pass, then Ms. Owens could then
She can either withdraw her motion or she has to get a second.
then offer it.
If she
just
doesn't
so
get a
there's-
second,
I
there's
think it's
not
gonna
even a
get-
discussion, you go back to Mrs. Manning's.
I think it's going to get very confusing on what you're voting
It
on.
is confusing.
Mrs. Holtz, do you have a question, Mrs. Holtz?
I don't understand.
See what I mean?
I also wanted to offer an amendment. Am I able to after this?
Well, if you can get a second before Mrs. Owens gets a second, yes, that's how that would go. But
Well, Ms.
Can we
Owens just
just-
stated that she would allow a vote on my substitute before making hers, if that's agreeable.
if you want to do that, I would suggest you withdraw your motion at this time, which returns us to Ms. Manning's motion. Somebody else could make a motion, but that would leave Ms. Manning's
I
motion.
call the question on my substitute motion.
Well, that takes 2/3.
Well, you can't call it off.
Okay, I will withdraw my substitute motion and wait until after the vote on Ms. Manning's.
So yes, we're still discussing now the Mrs. Manning's motion, substitute motion, and Mrs. Riggs. Are you still intending to be in the queue, Mrs. Riggs?
I just wanted to say something on Miss Manning's motion.
Yes,
That's
that's
okay.
what we're back to.
All right, that's all I wanted to do. I agree with parent choice with their children and what they decide, but in this situation, I just don't think it's the right thing to do. I think that more than anything, I would want my own two children to be going back to school too. But before that, I want them to be safer. To be safer. I'm not going to say completely safe because we know that's not going to work, but safer before we do that. So I'm not in agreement to that because of that.
And Mrs. Hughes?
Yeah, also, well, I wanted to comment further back that I do believe everybody is trying to make the best decisions on what they believe. And I think kind of the personal attacks need to stop. I have heard much from doctors that I've spoken to that they feel that the kids need to go back. We have a doctor here that apparently doesn't feel that they need to go back. The problem is, every time you hear something that you agree with, it's science. Every time you hear something you don't agree with, it's politics. You don't get to have it both ways. The different professionals have different opinions, and you agree with some and you don't agree with some. That's really kind of the end. It doesn't just become science because you agree with it. It's all science, but science has many interpretations. I've also heard people say if you send kids back, what is your number that is expendable, because they're all going to die? Well, 0 is the number that I consider expendable. I don't consider any human being expendable. But I heard from 2 people in the last couple of days, one a very close friend and one a relative, both whose children are having suicidal ideations. One of them had to be hospitalized, and the isolation was cited as the reason. And so it's just as easy to come at it from that viewpoint and say, what is your number? Well, nobody here has a number on either side of it. Nobody here wants any child to be depressed and kill themselves. Nobody here wants any child to catch a virus and die. Just stop. Just stop all of that. Now, I do believe in parental choice. I do believe parents know best. And if you disagree with me, I still don't think you want children to die. But stop. It really lessens what you're trying to say. It doesn't get your message across better.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on this? If not, I'll ask Mrs. Manning to restate. Oh, okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mrs. Hughes. I was going to say very similar comments, and I just wanted to clarify that somebody said, that we can't sacrifice teachers and kids for everybody to go back. Well, this option doesn't say everybody to go back. This option is for choice. And I know the survey or questionnaire or whatever doesn't give us an exact question, an exact number, but to me, it signifies that we could have some sort of estimation of the willingness of some of our students and some of our parents and some of our teachers and staff as to where they want to be. And again, like Ms. Hughes said, and the thing is, like one doctor says it's not the right time, but I've got on my phone emails from doctors again in the last couple of days that said I would send my 4 children to school September 8th. I think it's the right thing to do because the unintended consequences of those suffering because of isolation and because of no education, not the proper type of education, not the proper type of support at home, does not justify the closure. And I'm also completely concerned, as Ms. Manning said, and Mr. Edwards, and I think we all are, if we're going to get in the green, I really do think that some of our students may not see the inside of the building for a lot longer than I'm willing to sign off on.
Can I just speak to that one last? I know you all want to get to a vote, but just to that one more time. Our plan does not say we have to get to green before all students are in school. It does not say that. It says that when we get to yellow, we will bring back a select set of students, which is a lot of them, most of them, and that we will continue then to monitor the data. And even if we're in yellow, if it's stable and it's declining at all, then we'll begin looking at, and if our measures are working and everything's going the way it's supposed to be going and we're not seeing outbreaks or any concerning things that we should be talking about, then we'll begin talking about bringing them in, and we'll be doing that in consultation with our health experts and with the Department of Health. And so it does not say we have to get to green before all students. It's what it does say is if we get to green, that triggers all students. There's no more conversation about it. All kids are coming back who've chosen option 1. I completely disagree.
But
Yeah.
And that was the one question.
Well, that's why I've been
asked.
trying to say it's being mischaracterized over and over and over again. And that we have a lot of room to move kids. Yeah. We have a lot of room to move kids back to school between yellow and green. Green is a hard yes, go. Yellow gives us an opportunity to evaluate what the data looks like, how our measures are working, and to begin bringing students back if all those things are going in the right direction.
Well, it's additional explanation to my question from 2 hours ago, so thank you. So, any further discussion? And then I was going to ask Mrs. Manning to restate the motion.
You ready?
Yes, ma'am.
My substitute motion is based upon recommendations by medical experts, including the AAP and CDC, as well as parent and staff questionnaires. My motion proposes that we allow parent choice for in-person or virtual learning to begin at the start of the school year. My motion supports the superintendent's recommendations regarding social distancing measures and mitigation strategies to include providing proper PPE to protect our staff. I support his recommendations with the following changes. Allow choice to begin at the beginning of the school year and create a guide to monitor COVID conditions based on hospitalization data.
Okay, and we had our second from earlier, so with that, raised hand vote, and so this would be, raise your hand if you're in favor. Yes, Madam Clerk? Or Madam Board Attorney?
Raise your hand for ayes. The next time the clerk calls, it will be for nays, and if there's an abstention, she'll call that as the third round.
So, hand raised for ayes for this substitute motion.
We have 3 ayes.
And for the record, because this, for people that may not be seeing us on TV, the ayes for Mrs. Manning's motion are Mrs. Weems, Mrs. Manning, and Mrs. Hughes. The next vote would be raise your hand for the nays. For the record, that would be Ms. Owens voting nays, Ms. Felton voting nay to the motion, Ms. Melnick, Ms. Rye, Mr. Edwards, Mrs. Anderson, and Mrs. Holtz. Mrs. Riggs, are you voting? I'm sorry, Mrs. Riggs, are you voting? That returns you to the initial motion at this time, unless someone else is making another motion.
Yes, ma'am?
Okay, I would like to propose a substitute amendment or substitute motion, whatever the correct wording would be, that supports Dr. Spence's plan in regards to the designated groups as outlined in the return plan. But for the rest of the populations, I would propose that we use Virginia Beach positivity rates, not instead of the regional statistics, but in addition as the final check marker before moving into face-to-face instruction.
Is there a second before we have discussion? All right, hearing none, we thank you. If I could just add my comment, I keep thinking of what the good doctor said, I think it was in the last hour, about artificial separation, and so I'm just going.
I'll talk with you after. I think we can make that happen without it being a motion. Yeah.
Did you want to make a motion?
May I?
Mr. Edwards,
Yeah.
yes.
If you look at the numbers, the other urban areas, which include Hampton, Newport News, Norfolk, Portsmouth, and to some extent Chesapeake, those areas all have worse numbers than we do. And numerically, that constitutes a much larger portion of the total region population-wise than the other, the softer areas of the Suffolks and Matthew, Poquoson and all those outliers. So I think I would have supported it if I thought it would have made a difference, but I don't think it does. I think our numbers are currently better than those, and I think we will remain better. And region-wise, I think we're under the you know, our numbers are under the region, so. But I did worry about it. I wanted to explain why I didn't second it.
Okay, Dr. Spence, and then Mrs. Holtz. Okay, I saw a finger. Mrs. Holtz.
Point of order, I'm not sure. I wanted to propose an amendment, and I wasn't sure when the time was right.
This would be the time.
Okay. Is it on? Okay. Chairman Rye, I would like to propose an amendment to Superintendent Dr. Spence's recommendations. I appreciate the work that he and his panel have done and accomplished, and I applaud the fact that they presented this through science and data. But even all this information allows for different points of view. I am proposing that students start the first nine weeks in virtual learning, and after 7 weeks, reassess the data, communicate openly with staff and parents on what to do next. And after that, when we have a better handle on how this virus is affecting our community, the color metrics can drive future decisions. My first read of this document, when we got it a few weeks ago, that we'd have a virtual start for everybody. And so did my friends think that, but it was very kind of ambiguous. Now I feel a face-to-face teaching with so many grade levels, it's the entire elementary really, or the people that elect, the day after Labor Day is reckless. Hundreds will be crowding our beaches, families and relatives will be gathering, and tourists will be bringing all their baggage to our community. And primarily, my concern is about teacher preparation. So 1 week, a teacher could be teaching in person, and the next week, depending if the color metric moves and we go into red, should have to switch to virtual learning with little warning. And this could happen several times. This is a nightmare scenario for any educator and for students as well. How could we expect them to do that? Teachers are very talented, and I know they how to multitask, but they're not magicians. You can't make a change overnight like that. And even parents who would like a 5-day school week, they'll have their lives and their work schedules disrupted as well. The face-to-face teaching model that can fluctuate on a color rubric just doesn't sound stable to me. Let's make it easy. Open with the virtual 9-week start for everybody, and then we can decide after that to see how it goes. But I do think teachers need to have a definitive answer now, today, tonight, about what the September and the October calendar will look like. I'm not optimistic that by September, and it's just a month away, this virus will be waning and we can safely return to schools. And I predict we'll have an upspring in cases. And that is why I would like to propose to amend the recommendations to start the first 9 weeks with virtual learning only, and then ease into other types of learning if the situation warrants it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is there a second? Mrs. Briggs?
I second it.
Second it for discussion, okay. So who would like to discuss?
Can I just, can you repeat what the proposal is? I don't understand. That we're gonna start all virtual, well, we are starting all virtual.
For the full 9 weeks.
Oh,
I
I'm
think
sorry.
to amend it for the full 9 weeks. Yes, just the full 9 weeks. Not to worry about the yellow and but just to go for the full 9 weeks and then ease into it.
Okay, discussion. Mr. Edwards?
I remain optimistic that we may get those numbers down sometime in the next 14 weeks. And that's how long it is until the end of the first 9 weeks. So, I understand the stability arguments and a lot. I understand some of the positives, but the negatives of saying we absolutely will not allow anybody in our buildings for another 14 weeks is something I can't support.
Okay, Ms. Owens.
I just want to make sure I have clarification. With your proposal, Ms. Holtz, is there any leeway or consideration for those designated populations, or we're saying no special education for the first 14, no face-to-face, because obviously instruction continues, but even if the numbers go to whatever, there's still no option for face-to-face instruction for any of our high-need populations or designated students?
I'm not sure. I would leave that to Dr.
If I
Spence.
can clarify, and I'm not sure how much you all are aware, you've always had the ability to bring in programs or designated groups on there. So that's always something the superintendent has been able to make a choice about. And you have been bringing people in. You had a successful ESY program, and that worked out. You also had other people, not just ESY, specialized programs, and not everybody, but you still have that option. So my guess would be, it would be at the superintendent's discretion. If he thought certain smaller groups needed to be brought in, he could do that. And you have been doing that for most of the time period.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And I would need to know that that was a consideration to be supportive of that. But with that, I could be supportive of that for the first 9 weeks.
Mrs. Weems.
Yeah, and I guess, Cammie, that's because we're in phase 2, and that's what allows pre-K.
You actually had that in phase 1.
Phase 1. I meant
Yeah,
phase 1.
you had that ability. If you designated a group that needed to be brought in for certain reasons and you could provide it, you had that discretion. It took us a while because it came on so fast to decide what we were going to do for it. You've had that ability all along, and you would define the group and why you were bringing it in, and that's something the superintendent would do. He could also seek a variance from a VDOE. So that would be at the superintendent's discretion, unless you tell him absolutely you don't want anybody in the schools. He could decide that certain groups need to be in and what the parameters were for bringing them in. And again, you had ESY programs, you had ELL students in, you had some specialized other programs in because it was determined it was necessary for them to continue getting those type of studies. I believe that would still go on at the superintendent's discretion.
Okay, my question, I guess, for Ms. Holtz, or maybe Dr. Spence, if she doesn't quite know. But I guess what your fear, Dottie, is just the being in school and then out of school, and then if the numbers change, you're back in school, if the numbers change again, back. So Dr. Spence, is that actually how it would happen? So say after 3 or 4 weeks in September, the numbers are great. After 14 days, we get back in school, and then the numbers spike a month later. What do we do? So can you clarify all that?
So I think it's all gonna have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, right? Because if the numbers spike because of something in a facility, it wouldn't make sense for us to necessarily move kids back out of school. But we would be consulting all along with the health department and our health experts. And I would say, I'm concerned about the arbitrary nature of 9 weeks. There's not a scientific reason for 9 weeks. There's not a data-driven reason for 9 weeks. I do understand the notion of planning, but we feel like with professional development, folks can be ready to do virtual instruction to begin with, and the folks sort of know how to do face-to-face instruction. And if they've already been trained in how to handle virtual instruction, then if we have to go back into that environment, we could. So I'm just wondering, because, I mentioned the data, would it be okay just to ask if either Dr. Allen or Dr. Best had a perspective on this substitute? Did anybody concerned? Is that okay, Madam Chair? So I'll just ask Dr. Rowland or Dr. Best, did you have any perspective on that?
Absolutely, Amy. So this is a very difficult situation. This is a pandemic. We have never seen anything like this before. The urgency for me, and the reason I'm here 1 in the morning is because the kids that I'm seeing every day in my office are in trouble. These healthy kids that I've taken care of their whole lives are in trouble. And to just say, you know, this is hard, we want to keep them safe. Well, if you want to keep them safe, a lot of these kids are safer at school. Kids will die from not being in school. Some already have. And so I ask you to look at this plan. No plan is perfect. You can poke holes in this plan for the next 24 hours. Nothing's perfect, but that's why we all have to communicate with each other and continue to work together. We as the medical community support you. We're never going to have the perfect plan. We're never going to be able to promise 100% safety. But these kids are not, many of them are not safe at home, be it even if they're in a loving environment, they're depressed, they're anxious, they're suicidal, they're gaining 50 pounds. There's so many health consequences from this. So I just ask you, you know, we put a lot of thought into this plan and we use some reasonable starting points. And I really hope that we can be brave together and offer choices to our community and allow our families to choose what is best. And we don't know how all the questionnaires will fall out. You know, we have to get our teachers to feel as safe as they can be, just like I have my nurses and my staff prepared in our office wearing PPE. And we do all of these mitigating strategies in conjunction with looking at the community data. And that's one piece of it. But we just have to work together, and we're going to have to make that jump sometime. I don't think it's going to be any easier in 9 weeks. It could be that we're back in school at the end of September if those metrics look right. But let's use the data to give us the best decision, and then use flexibility in the plan to modify as we have to. But this is urgent out there. So thank you.
And I just wanted to, can I piggyback on that real quick?
Please.
So I know most of you don't know who I am, but I do work in the emergency departments on the entire South Side. My group covers all of the Centera ER. So I am seeing literally the real-time events that happen and real-time patients, the worst of the worst, and everything that comes along with it. And just want to say that 9 weeks, yeah, I completely agree with Dr. Spence. 9 weeks is completely arbitrary. I think I understand why everyone here is recommending that. Certainly I'm not on the school board, so it seems very arbitrary to me. But from a data perspective, I will say that when you look at the graph that showed when we started to increase again, it coincided with several things, and that would be that phase 3, we hit phase 3 right around 4th of July weekend. So I was not surprised to see that spike. We just got word from Governor Northam today that he is kind of cracking down on bars and restaurants and how long they would be open. So I do think we are already, from a state perspective, undergoing some mitigation strategies from a community perspective. And I do expect those case rates to go down. And I just want to clarify, at no point is anyone suggesting that we would open. I don't think anything, we're not ready to open today. We're not ready to open a week from now. This is not, if it's in red, we don't open. I think everyone here is in agreement with that. So saying that we would just open the doors on September 8th, just because it's September 8th, I don't think anyone here agrees that's the right measure, which is why we worked so diligently and so hard to use a data-driven recommendation. Thanks.
Thank you, doctors.
Mrs. Riggs.
I know you didn't choose just arbitrary, and you were very explicit with your science and your decisions and all of that. But you just said, the doctor just said that it spiked after 4th of July, and we're not going to open tomorrow. Well, we know we're not. The beginning of school is the 8th or 7th or 8th, whatever, of September. So you're talking 4 weeks away. Also at that beginning is Labor Day. If it spiked 4th of July, if it spiked Father's Day, and it spiked Memorial Day, why wouldn't it spike again Labor Day? So that's my thoughts. So we decide, okay, it's gone down, it's out of the red, it's in the yellow. We can open in 4 weeks if we do it. And then all of a sudden it spikes. So what do? Bring them back in? Bring them back in? That's my question.
Okay, I think maybe that you're getting to testing also there. So I will say, because I think this came up later on someone's questions about testing and the delay in testing. So testing supplies are very readily available, so there's no delay in testing for lack of supplies. And there's rapid testing immediately available in all of our emergency departments. And so some tests are coming back even less than 24 hours. The longest I've seen are 48 hours. So we are getting near real-time results now. So I do understand your concern. I certainly think that if we were not in the yellow, that starting out with virtual learning would make the most sense.
I think it's also that we're going to have to live with a little bit of uncertainty here, and that's very, very difficult. But to make the choice to have an absolute virtual learning just to have some certainty, well, yes, that should be available to some families, but to then have all these other families who are, would like to go to school as much as possible, that should be an option presented to them, because the risk of not doing so is very serious. And we will have that data over time. And I don't wish to see what that's going to look like, because I know what it looks like now. And in the dark of winter, as time goes on, it's only going to get worse. So we're just going to have to live with some uncertainty together and do the best we can to have some consistency with our schedules. And that's where all the operational stuff, leave that to Dr. Spence and his team. But living with uncertainty is difficult. As physicians, we have to do that a lot. And in our practices, Dr. Best would speak to that too. We try to help our families understand risk and benefit. And this is one of those situations. And the risk of not having school is extremely serious. So let's let our families decide. And if community metrics allow, it's just a reasonable, data-driven way to do it. And we'll cut down on all of the things that we don't want to see in our community, all the suffering that we really want to keep at a minimum.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor. Anybody else before we vote on this? Mrs. Anderson?
So I kind of feel like, as been pointed out, that Labor Day is probably going to cause another spike. I can't help but believe that. We had a spike after the 4th of July, so I think it stands to reason that we'll probably end up with another spike after Labor Day as well. So my feeling is we're probably going to end, and we're going to start off virtually anyway. With our plan right now, correct? Aren't we planning on starting off virtually no matter what? For what, about 2 weeks for sure, would you say? Or
It's going to depend on what the data looks like when we get there.
right. So well, okay, so just for planning purposes, let's just say we're probably going to start off for the first 2 weeks with virtual learning anyway. So for me, the stability factor of saying, okay, we're just gonna do the first 9 weeks virtually would allow teachers to have better planning, better stability, and what they can plan for. So I just kind of have a feeling that we're going to end up the first 9 weeks, pretty much the first 9 weeks anyway. So I think I'll support this.
Mrs. Williams?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about science and data and deaths, and we just had a doctor to tell us that we've had deaths of students already. Not because of COVID, but because of the unintended consequences. And now you're going to support something for planning and convenience sake. No, I don't agree with that at all. Not at all.
I'll weigh in and say that, yes, I just feel the proposed plan from the superintendent offers more flexibility. Okay. Mrs. Riggs?
I'm not the doctor she is, and I understand that. But I also know that of people that have been tested, and every time it spikes, you might have a handle on it right now, but when it spikes, we don't get these tests back. People are still waiting a week, 10 days. So when it spikes and you've got all these people getting the test and the labs are overflowing, you still have to wait that long. So I don't want any of these children, the deaths either. Believe me, but I do want to, respond to those statements as well. I mean, I like Dr. Spence's plan and all that, but that's just my thoughts.
So are we ready to vote on this substitute amendment? Oh, Ms. Owens.
I know that we still are going to be waiting for Dr. Spence to do a final look at the numbers with our teachers who are willing or preferenced to return to the classroom and virtual. Is there a contingency factor if once they hear the plan, the numbers change and we don't have the numbers of teachers that we would need to willingly come back into the classroom, where we're in a situation where we're now telling teachers you're either coming back or you're not going to have a place to be? I mean, what are the chances that we're going to have to force, if you will, force teachers into situations that they don't feel comfortable?
Ms. Owens, I can't answer because I don't have those numbers. We're just going to have to cross that bridge when we get to it. And there may be staffing issues, and we may have to look at the CARES Act funding to support us in that arena. So I just unfortunately can't answer that until I know what those numbers look like.
So, I think we're ready to vote on this amendment to the superintendent proposal, and the amendment is to go virtual for 9 weeks. Is that correct, Mrs. Holtz? Did I state that correctly?
Excuse me?
The amendment is to go virtual for 9 weeks?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
All right, so we are ready to vote. So we start with a hand raise for those in favor.
There are 3 yeses, Ms. Trinace Riggs, Ms. Beverly Anderson, and Ms. Dottie Holtz.
And I think you need you need to ask for the nays.
Yes, you do.
And we'd like a vote on, and the nays being Miss Jessica Owens, Miss Manning, Miss Felton, Miss Weems, Miss Melnick, Chairwoman Rye, Mr. Edwards, and Miss Hughes.
It is like getting late, isn't it?
Okay, so that leaves us with voting on the original motion on the floor, I believe. That this is the last opportunity for anybody. I just want to add, it does give, even though this is district by district decision and town by town and city by city, it does, I certainly feel more confident isn't the word I'm looking for, but the fact that we have most of our surrounding districts falling in line this way, and Northern Virginia, and it just, all educators and school boards are struggling with it, and I don't think it's by accident that everybody just in the last few weeks seems to be falling in line with something close to what we're talking about here, and I just think it's for many of the same reasons. Like I said, I think our plan is a little more nuanced and gives a little more flexibility, and I appreciate that. And the other thing I just want to share is that in terms of all the communication we've all had from the community, you know, for all of us, these are our friends, our neighbors, our church parishioners, our doctors. Many are teachers or coaches who've taught or coached our kids, professional colleagues. And I just want to say to the public, the overriding majority have reached out with civility, with respect for our role. And, you know, we've tried to reciprocate in kind. And I think as a community and a division, and we had a wonderful email just in the last few days from a certain constituent offering all kinds of help to help with whatever plan we came up with. And if we could all move forward with that attitude, with that approach, I know Mrs. Weems and others have wanted that as well. So that's what I had to say. So I think, Madam Clerk, we're ready for a vote on, help me, Dr. Spence, with the name of the plan.
It's the fall 2020 plan.
Okay, sounds good.
Very elaborate.
Okay, a raised,
1 o'clock?
so a raised hand vote in favor.
There are 8 yeas for the proposed plan. And those,
You want our names?
yes, Trinace Riggs, Miss Felton, Miss Owens, Miss Melnick, Chairperson Rye, Mr. Edwards, Miss Anderson, and Miss Holtz all voted in favor. Those voting not in favor, please raise your hand. For the record, that was Miss Hughes, Miss Manning, and Miss Weems.
All right, thank you all for bearing with us. We just have a little bit more to get through with this. 5 more minutes, 5 more minutes.
How fast can you
Yeah,
talk,
come on.
Kenny?
Yes, yes.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm going to suggest that we put these on for August, so you can fully enjoy them. And I might also suggest that you want to move standing committee reports, if you don't need them, and just move on to,
Well,
Sure, I can do that.
but is your PRC chair, is there anything here that's time sensitive?
My PRC chair agrees with me, I'm sure, the points. And I'll just,
Or PRC?
Point of order,
committee?
don't we need to move to do something to?
how about you move to postpone them to an August?
I
one of the
move that
August
we
meetings?
propose the policy information items to the next meeting.
Second.
All in favor, raise your hands. I'm gonna go with 10. I assume that Mrs. Riggs would do that. And I'm assuming you want Mrs., remaining on, you have standing committee reports, and I don't believe there's a workshop, I'm assuming you don't want those either, so I don't know if you need.
She's here if you want to record it.
Mrs. Riggs, you're supporting my motion to, that's Mrs. Manning. Okay, she's going along with it. We'll take it up in August. That would only be if you have any committee reports would be your next agenda item.
The audit committee meeting scheduled for Thursday this week has been canceled. We only had 3 activity fund audits, which does not make a meeting agenda. So we will meet in August.
And we are adjourned. Thank you all.